London, 1815. Pride. Such a peculiar quality among the nobility of London. Some wear it as a shield, others as a crown. For the Duke of Ravensford, Henry Ashford, it was the invisible armor that kept the world at a comfortable distance. And it was also the very thing that cost him the only woman he ever truly loved. Lady Arabella Whitmore was never supposed to return to London, not after the scandalous way she departed 3 seasons ago. Yet here she was, stepping out of a gleaming carriage before the Hartingtons' grand townhouse, her chestnut curls framing a face that had only grown more beautiful in her absence. The evening spring air carried whispers faster than the breeze itself. Is that Lady Arabella? The very same who was practically exiled after the Ravensford debacle? And is that a French comte helping her from the carriage? Indeed, the gentleman offering his hand was none other than Comte Jean-Michel Beaumont, whose attentions to Lady Arabella were causing quite the stir among the ton. His perfectly tailored evening coat and confident smile suggested a man who had already claimed his prize. Little did the gossips know that across town, in his cavernous study at Ravensford House, the Duke had just knocked over an entire glass of brandy upon reading the society column announcing her return. Impossible, he muttered, his knuckles white against the crumpled paper. His valet, Thompson, carefully approached with a cloth. Your Grace, shall I send word that you will not be attending the Hartington ball tonight after all? The Duke straightened, his jaw set in a hard line that had become all too familiar these past 3 years. On the contrary, Thompson, have my best coat pressed immediately. The valet's eyebrow rose slightly. In their 15 years together, he had never seen such determination in his employer's eyes. At the Hartington mansion, Lady Arabella glided through the ballroom with practiced grace, though her heart hammered beneath her exquisite ivory silk gown. The modiste had outdone herself. The delicate lace overlay and subtle pearl embroidery ensured every eye followed her movement. Precisely the effect she had desired. You are causing quite the sensation, my dear, murmured the Comte into her ear as they completed their second waltz. Arabella's smile remained perfectly in place. That was rather the point of returning during the height of the season, was it not? Her words were light, but carried an edge only she understood. This return was not merely social, it was a reckoning. Across the room, Lady Whistledown, the notorious gossip and self-appointed commentator of the Ton, whispered to her companion, "The girl has grown remarkably poised. One would hardly believe she's the same impetuous young lady who challenged a duke to a battle of wits and lost her heart in the process." "And her reputation," added her companion with a smirk. "Perhaps, though I always wondered if there wasn't more to that story than met the eye." The music ended, and Arabella curtsied to the Comte. As she rose, the entire ballroom seemed to still. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd as a commanding figure appeared at the entrance. The Duke of Ravensford had arrived. His dark hair was shorter than Arabella remembered, his shoulders somehow broader beneath his impeccably tailored midnight blue coat. But his eyes, those piercing gray eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness, were now unreadable as they locked with hers across the crowded room. For 3 years she had practiced this moment in her mind. The calm nod, the dismissive turn, the utter indifference she would display. Instead, she felt her heart leap traitorously in her chest as he began to move purposefully in her direction. "Courage, my friend," whispered the Comte, squeezing her gloved hand gently. "Remember why we came." Arabella squared her shoulders. Yes, she remembered all too well. The Duke stopped directly before them, executing a perfect bow. "Lady Arabella, what an unexpected pleasure to see you gracing London with your presence once again." His voice was exactly as she remembered, deep, cultured, and utterly maddening. "Your Grace," she replied with a curtsy so shallow it bordered on impertinent. "I see little has changed in my absence. You still make fashionably late entrances." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Whereas you, my lady, have changed quite remarkably." His gaze traveled over her face with such intensity that Arabella felt a flush rising to her cheeks. Furious at her body's betrayal, she turned slightly. "Allow me to introduce Comte Jean-Michel Beaumont, my fiancé." The word hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown. Henry's face revealed nothing, but those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tightening of his jaw as he bowed to the Comte. "Congratulations, sir. You are indeed a fortunate man." The Comte smiled, his arm possessively circling Arabella's waist. "I count my blessings daily, your grace." "How delightful," Henry replied, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "I don't suppose I might claim a dance with the bride-to-be, for old time's sake?" Before Arabella could refuse, the orchestra began the opening notes of a quadrille. The Comte, with surprising smoothness, bowed. "But of course, I shall fetch some refreshment while you reacquaint yourselves." Arabella shot him a panicked look, but he merely winked and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her alone with the very man she had crossed an ocean to avoid. "Shall we?" Henry extended his hand, and Arabella had no choice but to accept. As they took their positions, she steeled herself against the familiar warmth of his touch. "I must warn you, your grace, that I have improved my dancing considerably since we last met." "As I recall, your dancing was never the issue," he replied quietly. "It was your tendency to speak your mind that society found so challenging." Their eyes met as they circled each other. "Society, or you, your grace?" The dance brought them together, then apart, together, then apart, much like their tumultuous history. "I always admired your honesty, Lady Arabella," he said when they next came close. "It was one of your most captivating qualities." "How curious. I seem to recall you using different words entirely. Impertinent, I believe, and unsuitable." The hurt in her voice was unmistakable, despite her efforts to disguise it. Something flashed in Henry's eyes. Regret, perhaps? But it was gone before Arabella could be certain. "3 years is a long time," he said softly. "People change. They reconsider." Arabella missed a step, recovering quickly. "Indeed? And what exactly have you reconsidered, your grace?" The music swelled as the dance brought them together one final time. Henry's hand at her waist was steady, but his eyes betrayed a storm of emotions as he leaned closer. "Everything," he whispered. Before Arabella could respond, the music ended. Henry stepped back, bowed formally, and then added in a voice too low for others to hear, "Welcome home, Bella. We have much to discuss." He walked away, leaving Arabella breathless and fuming in equal measure. Across the room, Lady Hartington observed the exchange with keen interest. "Did you see that?" she whispered to Lady Featherington. "I haven't seen such sparks since Guy Fawkes' night." "But she's engaged to the French Comte," Lady Featherington replied. "And after what the Duke said about her 3 years ago?" "My dear, that's precisely what makes this so delicious. The Duke looks like a man ready to move heaven and earth. And our Lady Arabella? She may claim indifference, but her eyes tell a different story entirely." Lady Hartington smiled knowingly. This season just became considerably more interesting. Indeed, as Arabella rejoined her fiancé, her thoughts were in turmoil. The Comte took one look at her flushed face and sighed. "He still affects you." It wasn't a question. Arabella shook her head. "He took me by surprise, that's all. It means nothing." The Comte's kind eyes studied her. "We both know that isn't true. But remember our agreement, chérie. I am here to help you, not to stand in your way." Arabella squeezed his hand gratefully. Few understood the true nature of her arrangement with the charming Frenchman. Fewer still would believe that the much gossiped about engagement was built not on romance, but on a foundation of friendship and mutual benefit. "Thank you, Jean-Michel. I don't know what I would do without you. You would manage splendidly, as you always do," he replied with a smile. "But now, I believe we have achieved our goal for the evening. We have announced your return to society with appropriate drama. Shall we depart before more complications arise?" Arabella nodded, suddenly weary of the scrutiny, the whispers, and most of all, the unsettling effect of seeing Henry again. As they made their farewells, she couldn't help glancing around for him one last time. He was watching her from across the room, his expression unreadable. But even at this distance, the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. 3 years ago, that look would have filled her with joy. Now it only reminded her of how thoroughly he had broken her heart. As their carriage pulled away from the Hartington mansion, Arabella closed her eyes and leaned back against the velvet cushions. "That was more difficult than I expected." The Comte patted her hand. "The first encounter is always the hardest, ma chère. But you handled it beautifully." "Did I? I feel as though I've accomplished nothing except confirming that the man still has an inexplicable power to unsettle me." "On the contrary," replied Jean-Michel with a sly smile, "you've accomplished exactly what we came to do. You've captured the attention of the ton. And more importantly, you've clearly rattled the unshakable Duke of Ravensford." Arabella opened her eyes, considering this. "Perhaps. But to what end, Jean-Michel? What do I hope to gain from this charade?" The Comte's expression grew serious. "That, my friend, is something only you can answer. Revenge? Closure? Or perhaps," he hesitated, "a second chance?" Arabella turned to gaze out at the passing London streets, lit by the gentle glow of gas lamps. "He had his chance," she whispered, "and he made his choice very clear." But as their carriage continued into the night, Arabella couldn't help but remember the Duke's parting words. Everything, he had said. He had reconsidered everything, and despite her best efforts to deny it, a tiny flame of hope flickered to life in her heart, a flame that 3 years of absence had failed to extinguish completely. The morning after the Hartington ball, London buzzed with talk of only one thing: the return of Lady Arabella Whitmore and the unmistakable tension between her and the Duke of Ravensford. In her aunt's elegant townhouse on Grosvenor Square, Arabella sat at the breakfast table, trying to ignore the knowing looks from her cousin, Lady Penelope Berkeley. "Well?" Penelope finally asked, unable to contain herself any longer. "Aren't you going to tell me everything? 3 years in the countryside followed by a mysterious sojourn in France, and you return engaged to a Comte and still causing the Duke of Ravensford to look like he's been struck by lightning?" Arabella calmly buttered her toast. "There's nothing to tell, Penny. I simply decided it was time to stop hiding." "Hiding? Is that what you call recovering from having your heart shattered before all of society?" Arabella winced. "Must you be so dramatic?" "I'm not the dramatic one," Penelope countered. "I wasn't the one dancing with the Duke last night while looking like I wanted to either kiss him or stab him with my hairpin." "Penelope!" Aunt Agatha exclaimed, entering the breakfast room. "Such language is hardly appropriate for a young lady." "Forgive me, Mamma," Penelope replied, not looking particularly contrite. "I was merely observing that Cousin Arabella's return has caused quite the sensation." Aunt Agatha settled herself at the table with a satisfied smile. "Indeed it has. I received 3 calling cards before breakfast. Everyone is desperate to secure your presence at their gatherings, Arabella." "How gratifying," Arabella murmured. "Nothing like a hint of scandal to make one popular." "Not scandal, dear. Intrigue. There's a difference." Aunt Agatha poured herself tea. "And speaking of intrigue, I've invited a few select friends for tea this afternoon. Nothing formal, just an intimate gathering." Arabella raised an eyebrow. "Define intimate. No more than 20, 30 at most." "Aunt Agatha!" "What? I can hardly keep London's most talked-about young lady all to myself, can I? Besides, your handsome Comte should be seen. It adds credibility to your arrangement." The way she said arrangement made it clear that Aunt Agatha knew perfectly well that the engagement was not what it seemed. One of the few who did. "Jean-Michel has business at the French embassy this afternoon," Arabella said. "Even better," Aunt Agatha replied with a gleam in her eye. "Your fiancé's absence will only fuel more speculation." Penelope leaned forward eagerly. "Is it true the Duke never married after you left? Viscount Darcy told me Ravensford turned down no fewer than 3 perfectly suitable matches, including Lady Harriet Cavendish." "Lady Harriet?" Arabella asked, before she could stop herself. "But she's beautiful, accomplished, and the daughter of a duke," Penelope finished. "Precisely the kind of match everyone expected him to make." "How fortunate for Lady Harriet that he declined," Arabella said stiffly. Aunt Agatha observed her niece with shrewd eyes. Indeed, though one wonders why such an eligible bachelor remains unmarried at 32. Perhaps he enjoys his freedom, Arabella suggested, rising from the table. If you'll excuse me, I have letters to write. In the privacy of her bedchamber, Arabella allowed herself a moment of weakness. She sank onto the window seat and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Seeing Henry again had been even more difficult than she'd anticipated. The years had only enhanced his devastating good looks, adding a maturity and gravity to his bearing that made him even more compelling. And the way he had looked at her, as though memorizing every detail of her face. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "A delivery for you, my lady," her maid announced, carrying an enormous arrangement of exotic flowers. The footman said it took 2 men to carry it up the steps. The riot of color and fragrance was breathtaking. Orchids, bird of paradise, and blooms Arabella couldn't even name, all arranged with artful abandon. "Who on earth?" she began, reaching for the accompanying card. The message was brief but unmistakable. "To remind you of the greenhouse where we first spoke honestly. Some things bloom more beautifully with time." Arabella's hand trembled slightly. The greenhouse at Lady Wilton's country estate had been their sanctuary, the place where they first dropped their public personas and discovered the minds and hearts behind the social masks. It was also where he had kissed her for the first time. "Shall I find a place for them, my lady?" the maid asked. "Yes, thank you, Mary." Arabella quickly tucked the card into her pocket. "Perhaps in the drawing room, where Aunt Agatha is receiving visitors this afternoon. Let the ton see these flowers and wonder. Let Henry know she wasn't hiding his gesture. 2 could play at this game of calculated moves." Across town, Henry paced his study, much to the dismay of his secretary, who was attempting to review the estate accounts. "Your Grace, about the timber contract." "Double the usual order for the tenant cottages," Henry said distractedly. "We'll need to replace more roofs before winter." Mr. Simmons blinked in surprise. The Duke had always been generous with his tenants, but this was unprecedented. "That's most considerate, Your Grace." "Is it? Seems like the bare minimum of human decency to me." Henry stopped at the window, gazing out at the garden without really seeing it. "Tell me, Simmons, do you think a person can truly change?" The secretary hesitated, unsure how to respond to this unusual philosophical turn. "I suppose it depends on their motivation, sir." Henry turned, his expression suddenly focused. "Exactly. Motivation." He strode to his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. There's something more important I need to attend to." At precisely 3 o'clock, Aunt Agatha's drawing room was filled with the most influential gossips in London, all pretending they had stopped by on a whim while shamelessly craning their necks to inspect Arabella. "France clearly agrees with you, my dear," cooed Lady Featherington, eyeing Arabella's fashionable gown. "Such a continental air you've acquired." "Thank you," Arabella replied pleasantly. "The French have much to recommend them." "Indeed," murmured Lady Whistledown from nearby. "Your comte seems quite charming, though I confess surprise at your choice, given your previous inclinations." Arabella's smile remained fixed. "People change, Lady Whistledown. Their priorities evolve." "Speaking of change," interjected Mrs. Granville, never one to miss an opportunity for mischief, "have you happened to notice how much the Duke of Ravensford has altered since you left? They say he's become positively monastic in his habits." "Really?" Arabella feigned indifference as she poured tea. "I haven't given it much thought." "Oh, yes," Mrs. Granville continued, warming to her topic. "No longer the carefree charmer. All business and responsibility now. Even donated half his racing stable to his cousin and established that school for tenants' children." Arabella nearly dropped the teapot. "A school? Quite an extensive one, from what I hear," added Lady Whistledown, with a particular emphasis on educating the girls as thoroughly as the boys. This detail struck Arabella forcibly. During their time together, she had often spoken passionately about the injustice of limited education for young women. Henry had listened, but made no particular comment. She had assumed he found her views amusing, but inconsequential. Had he remembered? Had he acted on her convictions? Before she could pursue this thought, the butler appeared at the drawing-room door. "The Duke of Ravensford," he announced. The room fell silent as Henry entered. He was dressed more simply than the previous evening, in a well-cut coat of forest green that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He bowed to the assembled ladies, but his eyes found Arabella immediately. "Forgive the intrusion, Lady Agatha," he said smoothly. "I was passing, and thought I might pay my respects." "Passing, indeed," Aunt Agatha replied with a knowing smile. "You're most welcome, Your Grace. We were just discussing the transformative effects of continental travel on young ladies." Henry accepted the cup of tea Arabella reluctantly offered him. "A fascinating topic. Though I've always believed true transformation comes not from changing one's surroundings, but from changing one's perspective." Their fingers brushed as he took the cup, sending an unwelcome tingle up Arabella's arm. "How philosophical, Your Grace," she remarked. "I didn't realize you had developed an interest in such reflective matters." "I've had considerable time for reflection these past few years," he replied, his gaze steady on hers. "Solitude can be quite instructive." The assembled gossips watched this exchange like spectators at a tennis match, heads swiveling between the two. "I noticed your magnificent floral arrangement," Henry continued, gesturing to the exotic blooms dominating the corner. "An unusual selection for an English drawing-room." Arabella raised her chin slightly. "A gift from an admirer with apparently unconventional taste. How fortunate you are to inspire such extravagant gestures," he replied, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Lady Whistledown cleared her throat. "Your Grace, we were just discussing your remarkable school for the tenants' children. Such a progressive initiative." Henry shrugged modestly. "It seemed the right thing to do. An education should be a right, not a privilege of birth or gender." His eyes flicked meaningfully to Arabella, whose cheeks colored slightly. "Some might consider such views radical," remarked Mrs. Granville. "Perhaps," Henry agreed. "But I've learned that the most valuable lessons often come from listening to those with perspectives different from one's own." The undercurrent of his words was not lost on Arabella. He was telling her, in the most public way possible, that she had influenced him. Unwilling to let him dominate the conversation or her thoughts, Arabella turned to Lady Whistledown. "Speaking of education, did I mention that my fiancé, the Comte, has established a similar program on his estates in Provence? His commitment to social improvement is one of his most admirable qualities." Henry's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How compatible your views must be." "Entirely," Arabella replied sweetly. "It's so refreshing to be understood." The barb found its mark. A flash of pain crossed Henry's face before he masked it with aristocratic composure. The tension in the room was palpable when the butler appeared again, this time bearing a small silver tray with a folded note. "A message for Lady Arabella," he announced. Arabella opened it, aware of the curious eyes upon her. The message was from Jean-Michel, brief and urgent. "Come to the embassy immediately. News from your brother. Important." Arabella rose, genuinely alarmed. "I must beg your indulgence, Aunt. An urgent matter requires my attention." Aunt Agatha, seeing her niece's distress, nodded. "Of course, dear. Shall I send for the carriage?" "That won't be necessary," Henry interjected, standing as well. "My carriage is already at the door. Allow me to escort Lady Arabella to her destination." Arabella wanted to refuse, but the news about her brother took precedence over her pride. "Thank you, Your Grace. I would be grateful for the expedience." The assembled gossips practically vibrated with excitement as Henry offered his arm and led Arabella from the room. This unexpected development would fuel conversation for days. In the privacy of his luxurious carriage, Arabella sat as far from Henry as the space allowed. "The French embassy, please," she instructed his driver, then turned to Henry. "Thank you for the assistance, but your presence is not required further." Henry settled back against the seat, making no move to exit. "I'm afraid I must insist on seeing you safely delivered. These are uncertain times, and a lady of your standing is perfectly capable of riding in a carriage unaccompanied," Arabella interrupted, especially when concerned about family matters. Henry's expression softened. Your brother, is he unwell? Despite her determination to keep him at a distance, Arabella found herself answering honestly. I don't know. The note was vague but urgent. Thomas has been in Vienna with the diplomatic corps. I was not aware Lord Whitmore had entered diplomatic service, Henry said, genuine surprise in his voice. Much has changed in 3 years, Your Grace, Arabella replied quietly, including my family's circumstances. Understanding dawned in Henry's eyes. Your father's investments. Arabella nodded stiffly. The collapse of her father's shipping ventures had been one of the factors that precipitated her departure from London. The scandal of financial ruin, coming on the heels of her disastrous falling out with the Duke, had been too much to bear. Is that why you went to France? Henry asked softly. To escape the gossip? I went to France because an old school friend invited me, Arabella said, and because anywhere seemed preferable to remaining in England where— She stopped herself. Where I had hurt you so abominably, Henry finished for her, his voice tight with regret. The carriage slowed as they approached the imposing gates of the French embassy. Arabella gathered her reticule, avoiding his gaze. The past is the past, Your Grace. We have both moved on to new lives. Henry reached across the carriage to catch her hand before she could exit. Have we, Bella? Have we truly? The use of her nickname, the one only he had ever used, sent a jolt through her. My fiancé is waiting, she said, gently but firmly withdrawing her hand. Henry released her but spoke quickly before she could descend. One question, before you go. Did you receive my letters? Any of them? Arabella froze, one foot on the carriage step. Letters? What letters? The genuine confusion on her face answered his question more clearly than words could have. I see, he said, his expression darkening. That explains much. We have indeed been pawns in a game not entirely of our own making, it seems. What are you talking about? Arabella demanded. Go to your fiancé, Henry replied, suddenly formal again. Attend to your brother's situation. But know this, Arabella, our story is far from finished, and I intend to ensure that this time no misunderstandings come between us. The intensity of his declaration left Arabella momentarily speechless. Before she could recover, a footman from the embassy approached to assist her, and the moment for further questions was lost. As the Duke's carriage pulled away, Arabella stood watching it disappear down the street, her mind reeling. Letters? What letters? And why did the mere suggestion of their existence make her heart race with both hope and fear? With these unsettling thoughts swirling in her mind, Arabella turned and entered the embassy, where another set of revelations awaited her. The board was set, the pieces in motion, and as Lady Whistledown would later write in her society column, when a duke determines to reclaim what he once foolishly discarded, one can only pity anyone who stands in his way, even a comte. The French embassy's grand reception hall buzzed with activity as Arabella was escorted through its marble corridors. Diplomats and their aides hurried past, their faces tense with purpose. Whatever news had arrived from Vienna, it clearly affected more than just her brother. Jean-Michel met her at the door to his private office, his normally cheerful face drawn with concern. Arabella, thank goodness. He ushered her inside, dismissing the attending servants with a wave. I apologize for the dramatic summons, but I thought you should hear this immediately. Is Thomas all right? She asked, her voice tight with worry. Physically, yes, Jean-Michel assured her, guiding her to a chair. But his position has become complicated. Here, read for yourself. He handed her a letter bearing her brother's familiar handwriting. As Arabella read, her face paled. Political intrigue? Thomas accused of espionage? She looked up, shocked. This is absurd. My brother is many things, but a spy? Never. Jean-Michel nodded grimly. I agree. Lord Whitmore is too forthright for such duplicity. This has the hallmarks of a manufactured scandal. But why target Thomas? Our family has no significant political influence anymore. Perhaps not, But your brother has been working closely with Lord Liverpool on delicate negotiations. There are those who would benefit from disrupting Britain's diplomatic efforts. Arabella stood and began pacing, her mind racing. We must help him. Can the French government intervene? Jean-Michel shook his head. Diplomatically impossible, given the current tensions. But, he hesitated. There is someone in London with the influence to assist. Someone with connections to both the Foreign Office and the highest levels of society. Arabella stopped pacing, suddenly understanding. No, absolutely not. Arabella, be reasonable. The Duke of Ravensford is the last person I would ask for help, she interrupted firmly. Even to save your brother's reputation? His career? Jean-Michel asked quietly. Your pride may be a luxury Thomas cannot afford right now. His words struck home. Arabella sank back into her chair, conflict written across her features. There must be another way, perhaps, but none so expedient or effective. Jean-Michel leaned forward, his expression earnest. I know your history with the Duke is complicated, but I have made inquiries since we arrived in London. His influence has only grown these past years. One word from him could ensure your brother receives fair treatment. Arabella closed her eyes briefly. And you think he would help after everything? I saw how he looked at you last night, Jean-Michel replied simply. And I noticed you arrived here in his carriage. Whatever transpired between you in the past, the man clearly still cares for you. Caring was never the issue, Arabella said softly, almost to herself. Jean-Michel came to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. My dear friend, when we concocted this plan of our feigned engagement, it was to help you return to London with your head held high, to show society and the Duke that you had not only survived his rejection, but thrived despite it. I remember our plan quite well, thank you, Arabella said dryly. But plans must adapt to circumstances, he continued. If approaching the Duke can help your brother, then swallow your pride and do it. You need not reveal our arrangement. Simply appeal to whatever remains of his better nature. Arabella withdrew her hands and stood, moving to the window that overlooked the embassy gardens. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns, reminding her that time was passing while her brother remained in jeopardy. And if he refuses? She asked, her voice barely audible. Then we find another way, Jean-Michel promised. But Arabella, from what I observed, I don't believe he will refuse you anything. She turned to face him, her expression resolute. Very well, I will speak to the Duke, but on my terms, not as a supplicant. Jean-Michel smiled. I would expect nothing less from you, ma chère. Shall I arrange a meeting? No, Arabella decided. The Pembroke Musicale is tomorrow evening. I know he will be there. His sister is performing. I will approach him then. A public venue? Jean-Michel questioned. Are you certain? Precisely because it is public, Arabella explained. He will be obliged to maintain civility, as will I. And if he agrees to help Thomas, no one need know that I approached him specifically for that purpose. Jean-Michel nodded, impressed by her strategy. Your mind remains as sharp as ever. No wonder the poor Duke looks so tormented in your presence. He clearly remembers what a formidable opponent you can be. Despite the gravity of the situation, Arabella found herself smiling. You, sir, are incorrigible. It is my most charming quality, he agreed with a mock bow. Now, shall we discuss how to proceed? If your brother's letter is correct, we have little time before these accusations become public knowledge. As they bent their heads together over Thomas's letter, Arabella pushed aside thoughts of Henry and what his reaction might be to her request. For her brother's sake, she would endure even the Duke's pity, or worse, his smug satisfaction at having her come to him for help. Later that evening, as Arabella prepared for bed, her lady's maid brought her another delivery. It arrived just moments ago, my lady. The messenger was most insistent it be delivered tonight. The package was small, but exquisitely wrapped. Inside lay a miniature book bound in soft blue leather. Arabella recognized it immediately, a collection of Wordsworth's poems they had once discussed in the greenhouse at Lady Wilton's estate. She had confessed her admiration for the poet's views on nature and social justice, and Henry had teased her gently for her radical sympathies. Opening the book, she found a pressed forget-me-not marking a specific poem. She was a phantom of delight. Below the title, a note was written in Henry's bold hand. When we spoke of this poem, you said it was a man's idealized vision of a woman, not her true self. I disagreed then. I was wrong. You are not a phantom, but flesh and blood, mind and heart, and in your absence I have come to see you truly. I await your response to my earlier question. What letters indeed? Arabella closed the book, her fingers trembling slightly. The Henry she had known 3 years ago would never have admitted he was wrong about anything. Nor would he have remembered such a specific conversation, let alone her exact critique of a poem. And yet here was evidence that he had not only remembered, but reflected deeply enough to reconsider his position. "Shall I take it away, my lady?" Mary asked, noticing her mistress's discomfort. "No," Arabella decided, placing the book on her bedside table. "Leave it." As she lay in bed that night, sleep eluded her. Her thoughts alternated between worry for her brother and confusion about Henry. The Duke was not behaving according to her expectations. She had anticipated coldness, perhaps, or at most, a polite acknowledgement of their past. Not this determined pursuit, these thoughtful tokens that spoke of genuine remembrance. And what of these mysterious letters he claimed to have sent? Were they real, or merely a ploy to engage her interest? By the time dawn broke, Arabella had reached a decision. She would approach Henry about Thomas, yes, but she would also demand the truth about these supposed letters. If he was playing some elaborate game with her emotions, she deserved to know. And if he wasn't, if there really had been letters she never received, then someone had deliberately kept them from her. Someone who perhaps had their own reasons for wanting to ensure that the rift between her and the Duke remained permanent. As the first rays of sunlight crept across her bedchamber, Arabella rose and went to her writing desk. She had preparations to make before the Pembroke musicale. If she was going to face Henry again, she would do so armed with both knowledge and purpose. And perhaps, though she would scarcely admit it even to herself, a tiny flicker of hope. Across town, in his imposing townhouse, the Duke of Ravensford was also awake with the dawn, poring over diplomatic dispatches and letters from his contacts in Vienna. The situation involving Lord Whitmore was indeed serious, though not as dire as it might first appear. Thompson entered silently with a pot of coffee, accustomed to finding his master at work at such an early hour. "Any progress, Your Grace?" the valet inquired, pouring a steaming cup. Henry ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Some. Lord Witherspoon confirms what I suspected. The accusations against Lord Whitmore are a smokescreen for something larger. The question is, what? And how does this relate to Lady Arabella's return to London?" Thompson asked, with the familiar ease of a long-trusted servant. Henry shot him a sharp look. "What makes you think it does?" Thompson merely raised an eyebrow, continuing to arrange his master's clothing for the day with meticulous care. "Very well," Henry conceded. "I believe her brother's situation may have precipitated her return, and her unusual engagement. The timing is too convenient to be coincidence." "The French connection, sir." "Precisely. A French fiancé would give her entree to diplomatic circles she couldn't otherwise access." Henry tapped his pen thoughtfully against the desk. "Though that doesn't explain why she chose that particular Frenchman." "Perhaps she loves him, sir," Thompson suggested mildly. Henry's expression darkened. "I observed them together at the Hartington ball. There is affection there, certainly, but not the kind that exists between lovers." "Forgive me, Your Grace, but might that be wishful thinking on your part?" Instead of taking offense, Henry laughed ruefully. "When did you become so impertinent, Thompson?" "Around the same time you began sending exotic flowers to engaged ladies, sir." "Touché." Henry rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the garden where gardeners were already at work. "I will see her at the Pembroke musicale tonight. Perhaps then I'll have a better sense of what game is being played, and who is truly moving the pieces." "And your sister's performance, sir? Lady Eleanor has been practicing for weeks." Of course I'll be attentive to Eleanor's playing, Henry assured him. But afterward. His voice trailed off, his mind already several moves ahead in the complex game that was London society. I've laid out your blue coat for this evening, sir, Thompson said. The one Lady Arabella once mentioned was the color of a summer sky. Henry turned, surprised. You remember that? I remember, sir, because you wore it consistently for months after she made the comment, and then never again after she left London. Henry stared at his valet, suddenly seeing the man in a new light. You've been monitoring my behavior all this time, haven't you? Thompson bowed slightly. It is my duty to attend to your needs, sir, including those you yourself might not recognize. And what needs have you identified now, O wise one? Henry asked, torn between amusement and irritation at being so transparent to his servant. The need for honesty, sir. With Lady Arabella, certainly. But perhaps more importantly, with yourself. With that profound observation, Thompson bowed again and withdrew, leaving Henry to contemplate his words in the growing light of a new day. Honesty. Such a simple concept, and yet so difficult to achieve, when pride, fear, and 3 years of regret clouded one's judgment. But if there was any chance of untangling the complex web that now surrounded Arabella, her brother, and the mysterious Comte, honesty would indeed be essential. Tonight at the musicale, he would find a way to speak with Arabella alone. And this time, no misunderstandings or half-truths would come between them. What Henry didn't realize was that Arabella was planning exactly the same strategy, albeit with a very different outcome in mind. As the household began to stir around him, Henry returned to his desk and the pile of diplomatic correspondence. Whatever trouble Lord Whitmore had found himself in, Henry was determined to understand it fully before facing Arabella. Knowledge, after all, was power, and in the delicate dance of hearts and politics that was about to unfold, he would need every advantage he could muster. The Pembroke Musicale was the highlight of the week's social calendar. Lady Pembroke had spared no expense, transforming her already elegant ballroom into a veritable concert hall with gilded chairs arranged in perfect rows before a small stage adorned with flowers. Arabella arrived fashionably late, on the arm of the Comte. She had chosen her gown with particular care, a deep sapphire blue silk that complemented her chestnut hair and fair complexion. If the color happened to match a certain coat the Duke had once favored, that was merely coincidence. Or so she told herself. Are you certain about this approach? Jean-Michel murmured as they made their way through the crowded reception rooms. We could simply request a private audience. And have the entire ton speculating about why I sought him out? No, thank you. Arabella smiled and nodded to acquaintances as they passed. This way, our conversation will appear to be nothing more than polite social interaction. If you insist, ma chère. But remember, your brother's situation grows more precarious by the day. Arabella squeezed his arm reassuringly. I am well aware, Jean-Michel. Trust me. As they entered the ballroom, Arabella immediately spotted Henry engaged in conversation with Lord Liverpool himself, the Prime Minister whose diplomatic mission Thomas had been supporting in Vienna. The two men stood slightly apart from the crowd, their expressions serious. Well, that's fortuitous, Jean-Michel observed. Perhaps your Duke is already investigating the matter. He is not my Duke, Arabella corrected automatically, though her attention was fixed on Henry's tall figure. He wore a black evening coat rather than the blue one she half expected, the severe color emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his eyes finding hers across the crowded room with unerring precision. For a moment, neither moved. Then Henry inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement before turning back to the Prime Minister. Come, Arabella said to Jean-Michel. Let's find our seats. The performance will begin soon. They were shown to excellent positions near the front, a mark of Lady Pembroke's high regard for the exotic French Comte and his beautiful English fiancée. As they settled in, Arabella was acutely aware of whispers and glances from the surrounding guests. You've caused quite the sensation in your blue gown, Jean-Michel commented, amused, though I suspect its effect on a certain duke was precisely your intention. "Don't be ridiculous," Arabella whispered back. "I simply happen to like this color." "Of course," he agreed, eyes twinkling. "Just as I happen to prefer red wine with fish." Before Arabella could deliver a suitably cutting retort, the room fell silent as Lady Pembroke stepped onto the small stage to introduce the evening's performers. The program began with a promising young baritone, followed by a violinist whose skill drew genuine appreciation from the assembled guests. Arabella tried to focus on the music, but her thoughts kept straying to the man seated several rows behind her. She could feel his presence like a physical touch, though she resolutely refused to turn and look. Finally, Lady Eleanor Ashford was announced. Henry's younger sister had grown from a shy girl into a composed young woman in the years of Arabella's absence. She took her place at the pianoforte with graceful confidence, her light blue gown a perfect complement to her fair coloring. The piece she had chosen was challenging, a Beethoven sonata that required both technical skill and emotional depth. From the first notes, it was clear that Lady Eleanor possessed both in abundance. Arabella found herself genuinely moved by the performance. She remembered Eleanor as a timid girl who played adequately but without particular passion. The transformation was remarkable. As the final notes faded, the audience burst into enthusiastic applause. Lady Eleanor rose, curtsied, and then, to Arabella's surprise, looked directly at her with a small, knowing smile before leaving the stage. "Interesting," Jean-Michel murmured. "It seems the Duke's sister has her own agenda this evening." The observation proved prescient when, during the interval that followed, Lady Eleanor made her way purposefully through the crowd toward them. "Lady Arabella," she said warmly, taking both of Arabella's hands in hers. "How wonderful to see you again after so long. Your return to London has been the only topic of conversation at our breakfast table for days." Arabella returned the younger woman's smile, genuinely pleased to see her. "Lady Eleanor, your performance was extraordinary. You've become a true artist." Eleanor beamed at the compliment. "Thank you. I've worked very hard these past years." She turned expectantly to Jean-Michel. "Forgive me," Arabella said quickly. "May I present my fiancé, Comte Jean-Michel Beaumont. Jean-Michel, this is Lady Eleanor Ashford, sister to the Duke of Ravensford." The Comte bowed elegantly over Eleanor's hand. "Enchanted, Lady Eleanor. Your talent at the pianoforte is matched only by your grace." Eleanor blushed prettily at the compliment. "You are too kind, sir, but I must insist you both join us after the performance. My brother has taken a small private salon for refreshments, and I know he would be devastated if Lady Arabella did not grace us with her presence." The invitation was delivered with such innocent enthusiasm that refusing would have seemed churlish. Yet Arabella recognized the strategic maneuver for what it was, an elegant trap. "How thoughtful," Arabella replied smoothly, "but I wouldn't wish to intrude on a family gathering." "Nonsense," Eleanor insisted. "It's hardly family only. Lord Liverpool will be there, and the Austrian ambassador." Her eyes twinkled mischievously. "I believe they have been discussing some diplomatic matter of great interest." "Something about Vienna?" Arabella stiffened slightly. So Henry had indeed been investigating Thomas's situation. Jean-Michel stepped in smoothly. "We would be honored to join you, Lady Eleanor. Your brother's hospitality is legendary." Eleanor clapped her hands in delight. "Excellent! I shall tell Henry to expect you both." With a conspiratorial smile, she added in a lower voice, "He tries to hide it, but he's been watching you all evening, Lady Arabella. That blue gown was a particularly inspired choice." Before Arabella could respond to this impertinent observation, Eleanor glided away, leaving a trail of knowing smiles in her wake. "Well played by the sister," Jean-Michel commented. "I begin to think the Ashford family is formidable in more ways than one." "Eleanor was always clever," Arabella conceded, "but she's grown remarkably strategic." The second half of the musicale passed in a blur for Arabella. Her mind was preoccupied with the upcoming encounter. She had intended to approach Henry on her terms, not to be maneuvered into his territory surrounded by his allies. Yet wasn't this precisely the opportunity she had been seeking? Access to Henry and Lord Liverpool together could only benefit Thomas's cause. As the final performance concluded, Jean-Michel offered his arm. "Shall we brave the lion's den, ma chère?" Arabella took a steadying breath. "Let us hope the lion is in a generous mood." The private salon Lady Eleanor had mentioned was an elegant room adjacent to the main ballroom. A footman stood at the door, clearly instructed to admit only selected guests. He bowed and stepped aside immediately for Arabella and the Comte, suggesting their names were at the top of the approved list. Inside, the atmosphere was intimate yet formal. Perhaps 20 guests circulated with glasses of champagne, their conversation hushed and serious. Lord Liverpool stood near the fireplace, deep in discussion with the Austrian ambassador, while Lady Eleanor entertained a small group of admirers by the pianoforte in the corner. And there was Henry, his tall figure impossible to miss, conversing with a distinguished gentleman Arabella recognized as Lord Witherspoon, one of England's most respected diplomats. As they entered, Henry glanced up, and for a brief moment Arabella glimpsed naked emotion in his eyes, relief, determination, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. Then his aristocratic mask slipped back into place, and he excused himself from Lord Witherspoon to approach them. "Lady Arabella, Comte Beaumont, how kind of you to join us." Henry's voice was warm but controlled. "I trust you enjoyed the musicale?" "Your sister is remarkably talented," Arabella replied. "She's changed considerably since I last heard her play." "Eleanor has always been determined to excel," Henry said, a note of genuine pride in his voice. "Once she sets her mind to something, heaven help anyone who stands in her way." "A family trait, perhaps?" Arabella suggested, meeting his gaze directly. A smile tugged at the corner of Henry's mouth. "Perhaps, though some might call it simple stubbornness." Jean-Michel cleared his throat discreetly. "If you'll excuse me, I believe I see an acquaintance from the French ministry. Lady Arabella, shall I fetch you some champagne?" "Thank you, that would be lovely," she replied, understanding his intent to give her a moment alone with Henry. As the Comte moved away, Henry offered his arm. "May I show you the Pembroke collection of miniatures? They're displayed in the alcove, and quite remarkable." It was a transparent excuse for privacy, but Arabella accepted nonetheless. "Of course. I've always admired fine miniatures." The alcove was indeed hung with an impressive collection, but neither of them spared the artwork more than a cursory glance. As soon as they were relatively secluded, Henry spoke in a low, urgent tone. "Your brother's situation is more complex than you may realize. These accusations of espionage are merely a smokescreen for something larger." Arabella blinked in surprise. "You know about Thomas?" "I made it my business to know as soon as I realized you had returned to London with a French diplomat in tow," Henry replied. The timing was too suspicious to be coincidence. Arabella felt a surge of indignation. "So you've been investigating me?" "I've been investigating a diplomatic situation that happens to involve your brother," Henry corrected. "Your involvement with the Comte merely confirmed my suspicions that Thomas's predicament was the reason for your sudden return." His perception was both impressive and infuriating. "And what exactly have you discovered in your investigations, Your Grace?" "That your brother is being used as a pawn in a dangerous game between certain factions in Vienna and Paris." Henry's expression grew serious. "He's not a spy, but he may have unwittingly carried messages for those who are." Arabella felt a chill run down her spine. "Is he in danger?" "Not immediate physical danger, no, but his diplomatic career could be destroyed if these accusations persist." Henry hesitated, then added, "I've spoken with Lord Liverpool. Steps are being taken to extract Lord Whitmore from Vienna discreetly before the situation escalates further." Relief washed over Arabella, followed quickly by confusion. "Why would you do this? You didn't even know I was going to approach you about Thomas." Henry's gaze softened. "Didn't I? You returned to London after 3 years, conspicuously engaged to a French diplomat with connections to the very embassy dealing with your brother's situation. It was hardly a leap of logic to assume you might eventually seek my assistance. And you decided to offer it before I could ask," Arabella concluded, understanding dawning. "To spare my pride." "To spare us both an uncomfortable public exchange," Henry corrected. Though I confess I had hoped for an opportunity to speak with you privately about the matter. Arabella studied his face, searching for any hint of smugness or satisfaction at having outmaneuvered her. Instead, she found only genuine concern and something that looked remarkably like respect. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thomas doesn't deserve to have his career ruined over political machinations he likely doesn't even understand." "No, he doesn't," Henry agreed. "Your brother is many things, but subtle has never been one of them." The observation, so accurate and unexpectedly fond, startled a laugh from Arabella. "That's certainly true. Thomas has always been painfully honest, sometimes to his detriment." "Another family trait," Henry murmured, his eyes never leaving hers. The comment hung between them, laden with meaning. Before Arabella could respond, Jean-Michel appeared with a glass of champagne. "Forgive the interruption," he said smoothly, "but Lord Liverpool was asking after you, Your Grace. Something about Vienna, I believe." Henry nodded, his expression shifting back to formal politeness. "Of course. If you'll excuse me, Lady Arabella, duty calls, but perhaps we might continue our discussion of miniatures another time?" "Perhaps," Arabella allowed, accepting the champagne from Jean-Michel. "Thank you again for your appreciation of the art form." A flash of genuine amusement crossed Henry's face at her deliberate ambiguity. He bowed and departed, moving with purpose toward the Prime Minister. Jean-Michel watched him go, then turned to Arabella with raised eyebrows. "Well, did you secure his help for your brother?" "It seems the Duke was already helping Thomas before I could ask," Arabella admitted. "He's arranged for him to be extracted from Vienna." "Impressive," Jean-Michel murmured. "And somewhat suspicious, no? To act so decisively without being asked." Arabella sipped her champagne thoughtfully. "I'm not entirely sure what to make of it myself, but I believe his concern for Thomas is genuine." "And his concern for Thomas's sister," Jean-Michel pressed gently. Before Arabella could formulate a response, Lady Eleanor appeared at her elbow. "Lady Arabella, I've been dying to speak with you properly," she said, linking her arm through Arabella's. "Jean-Michel, you won't mind if I steal her away for a few moments? There's a lovely terrace just through those doors, and the night air is positively divine." The Comte bowed gracefully. "How could I possibly object to such a charming kidnapper? I shall console myself with more of this excellent champagne." Eleanor laughed delightedly and led Arabella toward the terrace doors. "I do like your fiancé," she confided. "He has a wonderful sense of humor. Most Frenchmen I've met are either tediously serious or excessively flirtatious." "Jean-Michel is unique in many ways," Arabella agreed cautiously. The terrace was indeed lovely, lit by discreet lanterns and offering a view of the Pembrokes' immaculate gardens. A few other guests strolled along its length, but Eleanor guided Arabella to a quiet corner where a stone balustrade provided both privacy and support. "Now," Eleanor said, dropping all pretense of casual conversation, "you must tell me everything. Where have you been these 3 years? What really happened between you and Henry? And is this engagement to the Comte genuine, or merely a convenient shield for your return to London?" Arabella nearly choked on her champagne at the directness of these questions. "Lady Eleanor, that's hardly appropriate." "Oh, please call me Eleanor as you used to," the younger woman interrupted. "And don't bother with protestations of propriety. We both know I was always more interested in truth than social niceties." Despite herself, Arabella smiled. "You were indeed. I remember you once asked the Dowager Countess of Matlock her exact age at a dinner party. And she told me," Eleanor said triumphantly, 82 and proud of it. "My point is, Arabella, may I still call you that? Life is too short for pretense between friends. And I always considered you a friend, even after you and Henry. Well, whatever happened between you." The sincerity in her voice was touching. Arabella sighed, relenting slightly. "Very well, Eleanor. What would you like to know? Did you love him?" Eleanor asked without hesitation. "Truly love him?" The directness of the question took Arabella aback. "That's rather personal. Indulge me, please." Eleanor's expression was earnest. My brother has been different since you left. Withdrawn. Serious to the point of grimness. The Henry I knew growing up was never so hollow. Hollow. The word struck Arabella forcibly, echoing her own observations about the changes in Henry. Yes, she admitted quietly. I loved him, more than was wise, as it turned out. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. And now? This comte of yours, do you love him with the same intensity? Arabella hesitated. She couldn't betray Jean-Michel's confidence, yet she found herself reluctant to lie outright to Eleanor. Jean-Michel understands me, she said carefully. We share common interests and mutual respect. Not all marriages are founded on grand passion. Eleanor studied her face intently. No, they're not. But some people are meant for nothing less. She paused, then added softly, My brother never sent those letters, you know. Arabella's heart skipped a beat. What letters? The ones denouncing you to your father, Eleanor replied, watching her reaction closely. The ones that supposedly revealed Henry's true feelings about your unsuitability as a duchess. The world seemed to tilt beneath Arabella's feet. I don't understand. Don't you? Eleanor's gaze was penetrating. Someone wanted very badly to separate you and Henry. Someone who stood to gain from your estrangement. Someone who might have intercepted any correspondence attempting to heal the breach. Arabella gripped the stone balustrade for support. Are you suggesting that my father received letters purporting to be from Henry? Letters that I never saw? I'm suggesting, Eleanor said carefully, that my brother wrote to you nearly every day for 6 months after you left London. Letters that apparently never reached you, and that your father received correspondence that convinced him Henry held you in contempt. Correspondence that Henry never wrote. The implications were staggering. If what Eleanor was saying was true, then the entire foundation of Arabella's exile, her belief that Henry had rejected her utterly and publicly, might be built on deception. Why are you telling me this now? Arabella demanded, her voice unsteady. Because my brother is too proud and too honorable to do so himself, Eleanor replied simply. He believes that if you truly loved him, you would have given him a chance to explain in person, not fled to the countryside and then abroad. His pride is still wounded by what he sees as your lack of faith in him. My lack of faith? Arabella repeated incredulously. He publicly humiliated me at Lady Wycomb's ball, called me impulsive, imprudent, and utterly unsuitable to be a duchess. Eleanor shook her head firmly. He never said those words, Arabella. Never. I was there that night, remember? He danced with Lady Harriet, yes, at our mother's insistence. But the cutting remarks you overheard were not spoken by Henry. But I heard... Arabella stopped, suddenly uncertain. The memory of that night had burned itself into her consciousness. Standing in the darkened alcove, overhearing Henry's deep voice dismissing her as a possible bride, the cruel laughter that followed. But had she actually seen him speaking? Or had she simply assumed the voice belonged to Henry because it came from the group where he had been standing with Lady Harriet? Who then? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I think you know, Eleanor replied gently. Who benefited most from your removal from Henry's life? Who had the most to gain if he made a more suitable match? The answer came to Arabella with sickening clarity. Your mother, the Duchess. Eleanor nodded grimly. My mother is formidable in her determination to advance our family's interests. She had her heart set on a match with the Cavendish family. Your unexpected appearance in Henry's life threatened those plans. So she orchestrated my disgrace? Arabella felt anger rising, hot and righteous. Made me believe Henry had rejected me, while simultaneously convincing my father that Henry considered me beneath him? I cannot prove it, Eleanor cautioned. But yes, that is what I believe occurred. And Henry, proud fool that he is, assumed your departure without confronting him meant you found it easy to believe the worst of him. That you never truly trusted him at all. So we have spent 3 years apart because of pride and manipulation, Arabella said bitterly. What a colossal waste. Eleanor placed a comforting hand on her arm. Perhaps you both needed this time apart to grow into the people you were meant to become. The wisdom in this observation surprised Arabella. "When did you become so philosophical, Eleanor?" "Around the same time I mastered Beethoven," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "Suffering has its uses, I've found. It clarifies what truly matters." Arabella turned to gaze out at the darkened gardens, her mind reeling with these revelations. If what Eleanor said was true, and she had no reason to doubt the younger woman's sincerity, then everything she had believed about her parting from Henry was built on a foundation of lies. "What do you expect me to do with this information?" she asked finally. "I am engaged to another man now. The past cannot be undone." "Can it not?" Eleanor's voice was soft but challenging. "Engagements can be broken, misunderstandings can be corrected, pride can be swallowed." "You sound remarkably like your brother when you speak in those authoritative tones," Arabella observed wryly. Eleanor laughed. "I shall take that as a compliment. He is the best man I know, despite his flaws." She squeezed Arabella's arm gently. "Just think about what I've said. Observe him with fresh eyes, and perhaps give him a chance to tell his side of the story." Before Arabella could respond, the terrace doors opened and Jean-Michel emerged, followed closely by Henry himself. The two men appeared to be engaged in serious conversation. "Ah, there you are," Jean-Michel called, spotting them. "I was just telling the Duke about my estates in Provence. He seems quite interested in my agricultural methods." "My brother, the gentleman farmer," Eleanor said teasingly as the men joined them. Who would have thought the Tun's most eligible bachelor would rather discuss crop rotation than flirt with debutantes? "The debutantes rarely have anything interesting to say about soil composition," Henry replied dryly. "The Comte, however, has some innovative ideas about irrigation I find quite compelling." Jean-Michel bowed slightly at the compliment. "Your Grace is too kind, but I fear we have monopolized enough of your time this evening. Lady Arabella and I should take our leave." "So soon?" Eleanor protested. "But the night is young." "And we have a prior engagement," Jean-Michel said smoothly. "A small supper with the Spanish ambassador." It was a polite fiction, but one that allowed them to depart with dignity. Arabella, still shaken by her conversation with Eleanor, was grateful for Jean-Michel's perception. "Of course," Henry said, his expression carefully neutral. "But before you go, Lady Arabella, might I call on you tomorrow? There are some developments regarding your brother's situation I would like to discuss." The request was perfectly proper, the reason given entirely plausible. Yet Arabella sensed there was more he wished to say, much more. "Certainly," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Perhaps around 2:00? My aunt's drawing room is quite private." 2:00 it is." Henry bowed formally, but as he straightened, his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Until tomorrow, then." As Jean-Michel escorted her from the salon, Arabella felt as though she were leaving a battlefield rather than a social gathering. The night had brought revelations she could never have anticipated and raised questions she was not sure she was ready to answer. What if Eleanor was right? What if the wall of pride and misunderstanding that had separated her from Henry all these years was built on deliberate deception? And more unsettling still, if the foundation of her anger and hurt was false, what did that mean for her future? A future she had carefully reconstructed without Henry at its center. These troubling thoughts accompanied her home, where she lay awake long into the night, turning the possibilities over in her mind like precious jewels whose value she could not quite determine. Tomorrow, Henry would call. Tomorrow, perhaps, the truth would finally emerge from the shadow of lies that had obscured it for so long. Until then, Arabella could only wait and wonder and remember the look in Henry's eyes when he had whispered, "Until tomorrow." A look that spoke not of diplomatic concerns, but of hope. The morning before Henry's scheduled visit found Arabella in a state of unprecedented anxiety. She changed her gown 3 times, rearranged the flowers in the drawing room twice, and snapped at poor Mary when the maid suggested perhaps a ribbon for her hair. "I am not a debutante preparing for her first ball," Arabella said irritably. "This is merely a diplomatic discussion." Mary, who had been with Arabella long enough to recognize the signs of emotional turmoil, merely nodded. "Of course, my lady. The blue gown is lovely without embellishment." Blue again. Arabella glanced at her reflection in the mirror, acknowledging to herself that her color choices of late had been far from accidental. The soft periwinkle of today's muslin day dress brought out the warmth in her complexion and the amber flecks in her hazel eyes. "Thank you, Mary. That will be all for now." Left alone, Arabella tried to collect her scattered thoughts. Last night's revelations from Eleanor had upended everything she believed about her parting from Henry. If the Duchess had indeed orchestrated their separation through false letters and manufactured slights, then the foundation of Arabella's 3-year exile was built on sand. A gentle knock at her bedchamber door interrupted these troubling reflections. "Enter," she called, expecting Mary with some forgotten hairpin or message from her aunt. Instead, Jean-Michel slipped into the room, his expression grave. "Forgive the intrusion, Arabella, but I've received news I thought you should hear before the Duke arrives." Arabella rose from her dressing table, alarmed. "Thomas is safe," Jean-Michel assured her quickly. "In fact, he has already been quietly removed from Vienna, just as the Duke promised. My contacts confirm he arrived in Paris this morning." Relief flooded through her. "Thank heaven. But then what?" "It's about the Duchess of Ravensford," Jean-Michel said carefully. "My sources at the embassy report she returned to London unexpectedly last night." Arabella sank back into her chair. "The Duchess is here? Now?" "Arrived on the late packet from Dover, apparently. And her first stop was Ravensford House." The implications were clear. If Eleanor's suspicions were correct, and the Duchess had indeed been the architect of their separation, her sudden return just as Arabella and Henry were beginning to reconnect could hardly be coincidence. "She knows," Arabella said quietly. "Somehow she knows I've returned to London, that Henry and I have been in contact." Jean-Michel nodded grimly. "It seems likely. London society has talked of little else this past week. And now she's come to ensure history repeats itself," Arabella concluded, a cold anger settling in her chest. "To make certain her son doesn't renew his connection to a woman she deems unsuitable." "Perhaps," Jean-Michel agreed. "Or perhaps she comes to address other matters entirely. We should not assume the worst without evidence." But Arabella was already rising, her movements decisive. "You're right. We need evidence, not assumptions." She rang the bell for Mary. "And I intend to get it." Jean-Michel regarded her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "What are you planning?" "To arrive at the truth, once and for all," Arabella replied. "But first, I need to speak with my aunt." 30 minutes later, Arabella was closeted in Aunt Agatha's private sitting room, relating the substance of her conversation with Lady Eleanor and the news of the Duchess's return. Aunt Agatha, never one to mince words, responded with characteristic forthrightness. "If the Duchess did indeed forge letters and orchestrate your disgrace, she is even more devious than I suspected. And I already thought her capable of poisoning the king's tea if it suited her purposes." "But is it possible, Aunt? Could she have intercepted Henry's letters to me? Could she have written false ones to my father?" Aunt Agatha considered this, tapping her fingers thoughtfully against her embroidery frame. "Your father was always susceptible to matters of rank and propriety. If he received letters supposedly from the Duke, or more likely, from the Duchess on the Duke's behalf, expressing concerns about your suitability, he would certainly have believed them. And kept them from me," Arabella added bitterly. "To protect me, no doubt." "Most likely." Aunt Agatha's expression softened slightly. "Your father loved you, Arabella. He believed he was acting in your best interest, shielding you from what he saw as inevitable heartbreak. By breaking my heart himself," Arabella countered. "By rushing me away to the country without allowing me to speak with Henry, to hear his side. Men often confuse protection with control," Aunt Agatha observed dryly. "It is the prerogative of our sex to educate them otherwise." This pragmatic assessment surprised a laugh from Arabella, despite her distress. "Oh, Aunt, what would I do without your wisdom?" "Flounder about like most young women, I expect," Aunt Agatha replied, her eyes twinkling. Now, what do you intend to do about the Duke's visit this afternoon, and the Duchess's untimely return? Arabella squared her shoulders. I intend to confront the situation directly. When Henry comes today, I will ask him plainly about the letters Eleanor mentioned. I will tell him what I heard at Lady Wycomb's ball, and together, perhaps we can untangle this web of deception. And if the web leads back to his mother? Aunt Agatha asked gently. Are you prepared for that confrontation as well? It was a sobering question. The Duchess of Ravensford was one of the most formidable women in London society, a power broker whose influence extended into the highest echelons of government and the royal court. Crossing her would not be without consequences. I must know the truth, Arabella said finally. Whatever it costs. Aunt Agatha nodded, satisfied. Good. Uncertainty is a poison that corrodes the soul. Better a bitter truth than a sweet deception. She rose, smoothing her skirts. Now, I shall make myself scarce this afternoon. The Duke will call expecting to find you in the drawing room with me as chaperone, but I believe I shall develop a sudden headache around 1:30. Aunt Agatha! Arabella exclaimed, scandalized despite herself. That would be most improper. Nonsense. Penelope will be in the house, and the servants will be about. You will not be truly unchaperoned, merely less supervised than convention might dictate. Aunt Agatha's eyes gleamed with mischief. Besides, if you and the Duke are to have the conversation you need to have, privacy would be beneficial. Arabella couldn't argue with this logic, though she suspected her aunt's motives were not entirely altruistic. Agatha Berkeley had never much cared for the Duchess of Ravensford, and would likely take great satisfaction in thwarting any machinations by her old rival. Very well, Arabella conceded, but please don't mention any of this to Penny. She means well, but discretion is not her strongest quality. I raised your cousin, my dear. I am well aware of her limitations. Aunt Agatha patted Arabella's cheek affectionately. Now go prepare yourself. The Duke will be here in 2 hours, and I suspect this will be one of the most important conversations of your life. As Arabella left her aunt's sitting room, she felt a curious mixture of dread and anticipation. Today, she would finally learn the truth about what had separated her from Henry 3 years ago. Today, she would confront the lies that had shaped her exile. And perhaps, though she scarcely dared acknowledge it even to herself, today might mark the beginning of a new chapter in her relationship with the man she had never truly stopped loving. Across London, in the imposing grandeur of Ravensford House, a very different conversation was taking place in the Duchess's private drawing room. Absolutely not, Henry said, his voice cold with anger. I will not entertain this scheme for even a moment. The Duchess of Ravensford regarded her son with the implacable calm that had intimidated diplomats and royalty alike. At 54, she remained a striking woman, her silver-streaked dark hair arranged in an elegant coiffure, her posture regal in her traveling suit of deep burgundy. It is hardly a scheme, Henry, she replied. It is a sensible solution to a potential embarrassment. The Cavendish girl is still unmarried, still amenable to an alliance. With the appropriate settlements, the match could be announced before the month is out. I am not a chess piece to be moved at your convenience, Mother, Henry said tightly. I have no intention of proposing to Lady Harriet or anyone else at present. Because of that Whitmore girl, the Duchess asked, her tone making the name sound like something distasteful. I had hoped 3 years would have cured you of that particular folly. Henry's expression hardened. Lady Arabella's return to London is irrelevant to this discussion. Is it? The Duchess arched one perfect eyebrow. Then why has every gossip in London written to me about your marked attentions to her at the Hardington Ball and the Pembroke Musicale? Why am I hearing reports of exotic flowers delivered to Berkeley House and private conversations on moonlit terraces? The extent of his mother's intelligence network never ceased to amaze Henry, though he knew it should not. The Duchess had spent decades cultivating sources in every great house in London. My social activities are my own affair, he said evenly. Not when they threaten the standing of this family, the Duchess countered sharply. Have you forgotten the scandal she caused 3 years ago? Her impulsive behavior, her disregard for propriety? Henry's patience, already strained by this unexpected confrontation, snapped entirely. What scandal exactly? That she dared to speak her mind? That she valued substance over empty social rituals? Or perhaps that she failed to simper and flatter like the mindless debutantes you prefer? The Duchess's eyes narrowed dangerously. Mind your tone, Henry. I am still your mother, and I am still the Duke of Ravensford, he replied, his voice resonant with authority. A fact you seem to conveniently forget whenever it suits your purposes. A tense silence fell between them. It was the Duchess who finally broke it, her strategy shifting subtly. Henry, she said, her voice softening, I want only what is best for you and for our family. The Whitmore girl may be charming, but she lacks the connections, the training, the temperament to be a duchess. And now she returns from France, engaged to a foreign comte. What does that tell you about her constancy? It was a clever thrust, aimed at Henry's most vulnerable point, his lingering doubt about why Arabella had left without giving him a chance to explain, why she had never responded to his letters. But Eleanor's revelations the previous night had planted a seed of suspicion that now germinated rapidly in the fertile soil of his mother's obvious desperation. It tells me, Henry said slowly, that something drove her from England that was powerful enough to make her seek refuge abroad. Something, or someone, who made her believe there was no future for her here. The Duchess waved this away impatiently. Dramatics. The girl's father lost his fortune in those ill-advised shipping ventures. They retreated to the country out of financial necessity, not heartbreak. But Henry was watching his mother's face closely now, searching for the tells he had learned to recognize over years of negotiating with her. The slight tightening around her mouth, the almost imperceptible tap of her forefinger against her chair arm. Signs that the Duchess was not entirely comfortable with the direction of the conversation. Strange, he mused, that her father should decide to remove to the country immediately after the Wycombe ball, almost as if he had received some communication that made him believe London was no longer a suitable place for his daughter. The Duchess's finger stilled. I'm sure I wouldn't know about Lord Whitmore's correspondence. No? Henry rose from his chair and moved to stand before the fireplace, his back to his mother, as he pretended to examine the ornate clock on the mantel. Yet you seem remarkably well informed about other people's communications. The letters I sent to Arabella after she left London, for instance. The ones that were returned unopened. Young women are often dramatic when their expectations are disappointed, the Duchess replied smoothly. She likely instructed her servants to return your correspondence unread. Henry turned slowly to face his mother. Curious, then, that the handwriting on the returned packets matched neither Arabella's nor her father's. In fact, now that I consider it, the script bore a striking resemblance to that of your secretary, Billings. Color drained from the Duchess's face, then returned in two bright spots high on her cheekbones. That is an outrageous accusation. Is it? Henry's voice was dangerously soft. Let us speak plainly, Mother. Did you intercept my letters to Arabella? Did you write to her father, posing as me or as someone speaking with my authority, to convince him I considered his daughter unsuitable? I acted to protect you, the Duchess said, abandoning pretense with startling abruptness. You were infatuated with a girl who would have made you miserable within a year. Headstrong, opinionated, with no proper sense of her place or responsibilities. She would have embarrassed you, undermined your position in society. The confirmation of his worst suspicions hit Henry like a physical blow. For a moment, he could only stare at his mother, this woman he had respected and obeyed all his life, now revealed as the architect of his greatest unhappiness. You had no right, he said finally, his voice raw with contained fury. No right to make that decision for me. No right to destroy something precious out of your own prejudice and pride. The Duchess rose, drawing herself up with wounded dignity. I am your mother. It is my duty to guide you, to protect you from your own worst impulses. Your duty? Henry repeated incredulously. Was it your duty to lie to me? To manipulate the woman I loved? To rob me of 3 years of happiness because you decided, you, not I, that Arabella Whitmore wasn't good enough to be a duchess. Henry, no. He cut her off with a sharp gesture. I have listened to your guidance all my life, Mother. I have respected your wishes, honored your position, deferred to your judgment in countless matters. But in this, you went too far. The Duchess must have seen something in her son's face that alarmed her, for her tone became conciliatory. What's done is done, Henry. The girl is engaged to another man now. Surely you can see that reopening old wounds serves no purpose. What serves no purpose, Henry replied coldly, is continuing this conversation. You have admitted to deliberate deception that altered the course of my life. That is not something I can simply overlook. What will you do? The Duchess asked, a note of genuine apprehension entering her voice for the first time. Henry straightened his cuffs, his movements precise and controlled despite the turmoil within. First, I will call on Lady Arabella as planned. I will tell her everything you have just told me. And then, together, we will decide what happens next. You cannot be serious, the Duchess protested. She is betrothed to another man. A circumstance directly resulting from your interference, Henry pointed out. Had you not separated us 3 years ago, it is quite possible she would be Duchess of Ravensford by now. The Duchess blanched at this. You would have married her? Without my blessing? In a heartbeat, Henry confirmed. I loved her then, Mother. I love her still. And I will not allow your schemes or her engagement to stand in the way of at least attempting to right this wrong. With that declaration hanging in the air, Henry bowed formally to his mother and strode from the room, his mind already racing ahead to his imminent meeting with Arabella. Behind him, the Duchess sank back into her chair, her face ashen. For perhaps the first time in her formidable life, Augusta Ashford, Duchess of Ravensford, recognized that she had completely miscalculated a situation and that the consequences might well be beyond her power to control. As Henry's carriage rolled through the London streets toward Berkeley House, his emotions swung between fury at his mother's deception and a growing hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he and Arabella might find their way back to each other. She was engaged, yes, but to a man she had met during an exile that should never have happened. An engagement that, Henry was increasingly convinced, might not be as substantial as it appeared. There had been something in the way the Comte looked at Arabella, affectionate certainly, but lacking the possessive heat one would expect from a man truly in love. And Arabella herself had never once mentioned her fiancé with the starry-eyed devotion of a woman anticipating her wedding day. Could their engagement be one of convenience rather than passion? A shield behind which Arabella could return to London with her dignity intact? The possibility tantalized Henry as his carriage finally drew up before the elegant facade of Berkeley House. As he descended, straightening his coat and checking his pocket watch, 10 minutes before the appointed hour, Henry found himself uncharacteristically nervous. In the next hour, he would lay bare 3 years of misunderstanding and deception. He would offer Arabella the truth he now possessed, and hope that truth might be the foundation for a new beginning. Whether she would accept that offer remained to be seen. But Henry was determined that this time, no pride, no interference, and no misunderstanding would prevent him from making his feelings clear. This time, he would fight for the woman he loved with every weapon at his disposal, including the most powerful of all, complete and unvarnished honesty. As the butler admitted him to Berkeley House, Henry took a steadying breath. The moment of truth had arrived, and with it, perhaps, the chance to rewrite their story. Arabella stood at the drawing-room window, watching Henry's carriage arrive with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. The past 24 hours had upended everything she thought she knew about their parting. Now, she stood on the precipice of discovering whether Eleanor's revelations and her own suspicions were true. The butler's announcement of His Grace the Duke of Ravensford came all too soon. Arabella turned from the window, composing her features into what she hoped was a serene expression as Henry entered the room. He looked different somehow, his face more tightly drawn than usual, his eyes burning with an intensity that caught her off guard. Something had happened since last night. "Lady Arabella," he said, bowing formally, "thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace," she replied with a curtsy. My aunt sends her regrets. She has developed a sudden headache and must rest. A flicker of surprise crossed Henry's face, followed by what might have been relief. I hope Lady Berkeley's indisposition is not serious. Miraculously selective, I suspect, Arabella said dryly. My aunt has always had a remarkable ability to be ill at convenient moments. This unexpected candor startled a laugh from Henry. I see her tactical acumen rivals my mother's, though perhaps deployed for more benevolent purposes. The mention of the Duchess sent a shiver of apprehension down Arabella's spine. I understand Her Grace has returned to London, she said carefully. Rather suddenly, Henry's expression darkened. News travels quickly. London thrives on gossip, as well you know. Arabella gestured to a chair. Please sit. I believe we have much to discuss. Henry remained standing, his posture tense. Before we begin, there is something I must tell you, something I discovered only this morning. The urgency in his voice alarmed her. Has something happened to Thomas? No, he assured her quickly. Your brother is safely out of Vienna, as promised. He should be in Paris by now, under the protection of the British Embassy. Relief washed over Arabella. Thank you for that. Don't thank me, Henry said, his voice suddenly harsh. Not when I have been part of the reason for your suffering, however unwittingly. Arabella regarded him with growing concern. What do you mean? Henry began to pace, his customary composure visibly fraying. My mother returned to London last night. She came to Ravensford House this morning with a scheme to announce my engagement to Lady Harriet Cavendish. I see, Arabella said quietly, trying to ignore the sharp pang this information caused. How convenient. Convenient for whom? Henry demanded. Certainly not for me, not for Lady Harriet, who deserves someone who actually loves her, and most definitely not for you. The intensity of this declaration caught Arabella off guard. I don't understand. Henry stopped pacing and faced her directly. When I confronted my mother about her sudden reappearance and this absurd marriage plan, she revealed something I have long suspected, but never been able to prove. His voice grew tight with controlled anger. She intercepted the letters I wrote to you after you left London, all of them. And she wrote to your father, posing as someone with intimate knowledge of my feelings, to convince him I considered you unsuitable as a duchess. Though Eleanor had prepared her for this possibility, hearing it confirmed from Henry's own lips made Arabella feel as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. She admitted this, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not only admitted it, but defended her actions as necessary to protect me from making what she considered a disastrous match. Henry's expression was grim. In her mind, separating us was an act of maternal duty, not sabotage. Arabella sank onto the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. All this time, she murmured. All these years of believing you had rejected me, humiliated me. Henry moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate, that Arabella did not think to withdraw them. Bella, he said softly, using the name only he had ever called her. I need you to believe me when I tell you I never rejected you. Never. What you overheard at Lady Wycomb's ball, it wasn't me speaking those cruel words. But I heard your voice, Arabella protested, though with less conviction than before. You heard a voice from the vicinity where I had been standing, Henry corrected gently. But I had stepped away to speak with Lord Liverpool. It was Viscount Darcy you heard, a man known for both his cruel wit and his ability to mimic others. The memory reshaped itself in Arabella's mind. She had been hiding in the alcove, waiting for Henry to finish his obligatory dance with Lady Harriet. She had heard his voice, or what she thought was his voice, dismissing her as impulsive, imprudent, and utterly unsuitable. But had she actually seen the speaker? No, she realized. She had been too hurt, too shocked by the words to look, fleeing instead to the garden where Jean-Michel had found her in tears. Darcy, she repeated. But why would he say such things? Because my mother likely suggested he do so, Henry said grimly. Knowing you were probably nearby, knowing you would overhear. The calculated cruelty of this scheme took Arabella's breath away. And then she intercepted your letters, she said slowly, while writing to my father to ensure he would remove me from London before we could speak directly. Exactly. Henry's hands tightened around hers. A perfect storm of manipulation that kept us apart for 3 years. Arabella pulled her hands from his and stood, needing the distance to process this revelation. Why are you telling me this now? What do you expect me to do with this information? I am engaged to another man, Henry. A good man who has been nothing but kind to me. Henry rose as well, his expression pained. I know, and I have no right to disrupt the life you've built without me. But I couldn't let you continue believing I had rejected or betrayed you. Not when the truth is. He faltered, then continued with raw honesty. Not when the truth is that I have loved you every day for the past 3 years. That I love you still. The declaration hung in the air between them, both frightening and exhilarating in its directness. You love me, Arabella repeated, her voice unsteady. Yet you allowed me to believe you thought me unworthy. You never came after me, never demanded to see me in person. I did, Henry countered. I rode to your father's estate the day after you left London. Lord Whitmore refused to let me see you, claimed you were too distraught. I wrote daily for weeks, then weekly for months. When my letters were returned unopened, I assumed you had made your choice, that you found it easy to believe I would betray you, and your pride wouldn't allow you to try again. Arabella concluded, understanding dawning. My pride, Henry acknowledged with a bitter smile. The very thing that separated us in the first place. Yes, I was too proud to beg, too proud to pursue a woman who I believed had dismissed me without a hearing. Arabella turned away, moving to the window to gaze out at the garden while she struggled to contain the storm of emotions his words had unleashed. Why did you never marry? She asked softly. In all this time. Henry's reflection appeared behind hers in the window glass, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror of the pain. How could I? The only woman I wanted was gone. The simple honesty of this answer threatened to undo Arabella's carefully constructed defenses. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage before turning to face him directly. I need to tell you something as well, she said. Something about my engagement to Jean-Michel. Henry tensed visibly. You love him, he said flatly. I understand. I didn't come here expecting— No, Arabella interrupted. That's not it at all. She took a deep breath. Jean-Michel and I are not in love. Our engagement is an arrangement of mutual convenience. Henry stared at her, clearly stunned by this confession. An arrangement? Jean-Michel needed a respectable English fiancé to help secure his position at the embassy and to silence certain rumors about his preferences. I needed a shield behind which I could return to London with my dignity intact. Arabella smiled faintly. We became friends in Paris. When Thomas's troubles began, Jean-Michel suggested our engagement as a solution that would benefit us both. You're not in love, Henry repeated slowly, as if testing the words. You don't intend to marry him. No, Arabella confirmed, though until yesterday I had no reason to question the wisdom of our arrangement. I believed you had rejected me utterly. I thought I was protecting myself from further heartbreak by returning to London with a fiancé at my side. A look of dawning wonder spread across Henry's face. So, when Eleanor spoke to you last night, she made me question everything I thought I knew about our parting, Arabella admitted. And now your mother's confession confirms it. We have both been pawns in a game we didn't even know was being played. Henry moved toward her slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter this fragile new understanding between them. Bella, he said softly, if you don't love the Comte, and if you now know I never rejected you— He stopped, seemingly unable to complete the thought. Arabella felt her heart hammering in her chest. The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility and peril. What are you asking me, Henry? I'm asking if there's still a chance for us, he said simply. If, knowing what you know now, you could forgive the pride that kept me from pursuing you more determinedly. If you might consider the possibility that our story isn't finished after all. The vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. This proud, powerful man was laying his heart bare before her, risking rejection a second time. "It's not that simple," she said softly. "Even if what you say is true, even if we were manipulated and deceived, 3 years have passed. We are different people now. Are we?" Henry challenged gently. "Or have we simply become more fully ourselves?" He took another step toward her. "The Arabella I knew was passionate, intelligent, unafraid to speak her mind. The woman I see before me now has only grown more confident, more assured in her convictions. And I hope," his voice softened, "I hope that I have become somewhat less rigid, less concerned with society's expectations, and more with what truly matters." "And what does truly matter, Henry?" Arabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Love," he answered without hesitation. "Honesty, courage, the things we had begun to build together before my mother's interference tore them down." He was so close now that Arabella could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could sense the warmth radiating from his body. Every instinct urged her to close the distance between them, to return to the haven of his arms that she had missed for so long. But caution held her back. "What of your mother? If she separated us once, what's to prevent her from trying again?" "My mother no longer dictates my actions," Henry said firmly. "I made that abundantly clear this morning, and while I won't cast her out, she is still my mother after all. She will never again have the power to come between us. And Jean-Michel? I cannot simply discard him. He has been a true friend when I needed one most." "Then we will find another way to help him," Henry promised. "Surely a duke can be of some use in diplomatic circles. We can ensure his position at the embassy is secure without the necessity of a false engagement." Arabella couldn't help but smile at his determination. "You seem to have an answer for everything." "Not everything," Henry admitted. "I don't know how to make up for the 3 years we've lost. I don't know how to erase the pain you've suffered because of my family's actions." His voice grew husky with emotion. "And I don't know if you can ever fully trust me again. But I do know this, Bella. I will spend every day proving myself worthy of that trust, if you'll give me the chance." The raw sincerity in his voice broke through the last of Arabella's defenses. 3 years of hurt and anger dissolved in the face of this new understanding. This second chance neither of them had dared to hope for. "I never stopped loving you," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "Even when I thought you had rejected me, even when I tried to hate you for it. I couldn't stop." Henry's face transformed with joy. "Bella," he breathed, and then he was closing the distance between them, gathering her into his arms with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Their lips met in a kiss that held 3 years of longing, of regret, of unspoken love. Arabella felt herself melting into him, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. The perfect rightness of being in Henry's embrace. When they finally broke apart, Henry rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "Tell me this isn't a dream," he murmured. "Tell me I haven't imagined this reconciliation out of desperate hope." Arabella smiled through her tears. "If it's a dream, then we're sharing it." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "But there is still much to resolve. Jean-Michel, your mother, society's expectations." "Let them all wait," Henry said fervently. "For this moment, at least, let it be just us." Henry and Bella, finding each other again after too long apart. And so they did, standing in the quiet sanctuary of the drawing room, wrapped in an embrace that promised healing for past wounds and hope for a future neither had dared imagine until this moment. Outside, London continued its bustling rhythm. Society gossip speculated about the Duke's extended call at Berkeley House. The Duchess of Ravensford plotted her next move from the elegant confines of Ravensford House. And somewhere across the Channel, Lord Thomas Whitmore began his journey home, unaware that his diplomatic crisis had inadvertently set in motion the reconciliation of his sister with the man she had never ceased to love. But within that sun-dappled drawing room, Time seemed suspended. For Henry and Arabella, there was only this moment of rediscovery, this precious second chance that fate, or perhaps their own stubborn hearts, had granted them against all odds. "What happens now?" Arabella asked softly, when they had settled on the sofa, her hand clasped firmly in his. Henry lifted her fingers to his lips. "Now," he said, "we rewrite our story. Together, as it always should have been." And in that moment, with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows and Henry's steady heartbeat beneath her palm, Arabella allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, their story might have a happy ending after all. The following days passed in a whirlwind of emotion and delicate negotiations. Arabella's first task was a frank conversation with Jean-Michel, who received her news with characteristic grace. "Ma chère, I have eyes," he said, smiling ruefully as they strolled through the secluded paths of Berkeley House's garden. "I saw the way you looked at your Duke the moment we arrived in London. This development surprises me not at all." "You're not angry?" Arabella asked, searching his face for signs of disappointment. "How could I be? Our arrangement was always one of friendship and mutual benefit." Jean-Michel patted her hand where it rested on his arm. "Besides, I have received certain assurances from the Duke that my position at the embassy will remain secure, with or without an English fiancé." Arabella raised an eyebrow. "Assurances? When did you and Henry discuss this?" "This morning," Jean-Michel replied casually. "Over breakfast at his club." "You had breakfast with Henry?" Arabella was genuinely startled. "And you didn't think to mention this until now?" The Comte's eyes twinkled with amusement. "We men must have some secrets, no? But yes, your Duke approached me like the gentleman he is. We had a most civilized discussion about your happiness and my diplomatic future." Arabella wasn't sure whether to be touched by Henry's thoughtfulness or irritated by his presumption. "And what was the outcome of this civilized discussion?" "That our engagement may be amicably dissolved, with a story circulated that we discovered our temperaments were ultimately incompatible." Jean-Michel squeezed her hand. "I shall return to Paris heartbroken, but dignified, while you remain in London to heal from your romantic disappointment." "Leaving me conveniently unattached," Arabella observed dryly. "Precisely," Jean-Michel agreed cheerfully. "And after an appropriate interval, perhaps a month, the Duke may begin to pay you marked attention without society raising too many eyebrows." It was a neat solution, Arabella had to admit. Society loved nothing better than a broken engagement followed by a new romance. It provided endless fodder for gossip while ultimately satisfying the tongue's appetite for happy endings. "And what of your needs?" she asked, genuinely concerned for her friend. "Will you be truly all right without our arrangement?" Jean-Michel's expression softened. "I will miss your friendship and your clever conversation. But as for the rest..." He shrugged eloquently. "The Duke has offered his support to a cultural exchange program I've been advocating for years. French artists to London, English scholars to Paris. It's the perfect diplomatic project to occupy my attention and establish my reputation without the need for a socially advantageous marriage." Arabella felt a rush of gratitude for Henry's perceptiveness. He had found a way to help Jean-Michel that preserved both his dignity and his standing, while freeing Arabella from her obligation without scandal. "When will we announce the dissolution of our engagement?" she asked. "I think after your brother returns from Paris," Jean-Michel suggested. "That way, the attention will be divided between Thomas's diplomatic adventure and our romantic misfortune. Neither of us will bear the full brunt of society's scrutiny." "You've thought of everything," Arabella said admiringly. Jean-Michel bowed with a flourish. "I am a diplomat, after all. Finding elegant solutions to awkward problems is my specialty." They completed their circuit of the garden in companionable silence, both acknowledging in their own way that an important chapter of their friendship was closing, even as a new one began. That evening, Arabella received a note from Henry, delivered by his most trusted footman. "Dearest Bella, I trust your conversation with the Comte went well. He strikes me as a man of honor and uncommon perception. We are fortunate to have him as an ally rather than an adversary in the delicate days ahead." There is another matter we must address, however, one I approach with considerably less optimism. My mother has requested an audience with you tomorrow afternoon at Ravensford House. I have neither encouraged nor forbidden this meeting, as I believe the choice must be entirely yours. If you wish to confront the architect of our separation, I will stand beside you. If you prefer to deny her the satisfaction of an encounter, I will support that decision equally. But know this, whatever venomous words she may speak, whatever manipulations she may attempt, she no longer has the power to separate us unless we allow it. Send word of your decision, and I shall arrange matters accordingly. Yours, with a heart finally finding its way home. Henry. Arabella read the note twice, her emotions fluctuating between apprehension and resolute determination. The Duchess of Ravensford had caused her immeasurable pain, had stolen 3 years that could never be reclaimed. There was a certain temptation in refusing the audience, in denying the Duchess even the acknowledgement of her importance. And yet, what would such avoidance accomplish? The woman would remain a formidable presence in Henry's life, if not in his affections. To move forward truly free from the past, Arabella needed to face the Duchess directly, to look into the eyes of the woman who had deemed her unworthy, and show her exactly what she had failed to destroy. Decision made, she penned a brief reply. Henry, I will meet with your mother tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Some ghosts must be confronted in the light of day if they are ever to be laid to rest, but I would prefer to face her alone, at least initially. This is between her and me, a reckoning that has been 3 years in the making. Do not worry. The frightened girl she manipulated no longer exists. In her place stands a woman who knows her own worth, regardless of a duchess's approval. Yours, with a heart finding its courage, Bella. The following afternoon found Arabella ascending the imposing steps of Ravensford House, her spine straight and her resolve unwavering. She had chosen her attire with deliberate care, a gown of deep emerald silk that emphasized her dignity and confidence, adorned with a simple pearl necklace that had been her mother's. No excessive ornaments, no desperate attempt to impress with finery. Just Arabella Whitmore, presenting herself exactly as she was. Thompson, Henry's loyal valet, met her in the grand entrance hall. Lady Arabella, he greeted her with a warmth that belied his formal position. How very good to see you in this house again. Thank you, Thompson, she replied, touched by his evident sincerity, though I confess I never expected to return under these circumstances. The best journeys often take unexpected turns, he observed with surprising philosophy. His Grace asked me to inform you that he is in his study should you need him, but will not intrude upon your meeting with the Duchess unless summoned. Arabella nodded, appreciating Henry's respect for her wishes. Then I suppose you should announce me to her Grace. Indeed. Thompson's expression became carefully neutral as he led her through the mansion's opulent corridors to a set of double doors emblazoned with the Ravensford crest. The Duchess awaits you in the blue salon. With a deep breath to steady her nerves, Arabella entered the domain of the woman who had once deemed her unsuitable to cross this very threshold as a duchess. The Duchess of Ravensford sat like a queen holding court, positioned precisely in the center of an elegant settee upholstered in the palest blue silk. Though well into her 50s, she remained a striking woman, her silver-streaked dark hair, so like Henry's in color, arranged impeccably beneath a lace cap adorned with ribbons that matched the salon's decor. Lady Arabella, she acknowledged, neither rising nor extending her hand in greeting. How good of you to accept my invitation. Your Grace, Arabella replied, with a curtsy that was correct in form but not overly deferential in execution. I believe we have matters to discuss that have been left unaddressed for far too long. The Duchess gestured to a chair positioned across from her, at a distance that made intimacy impossible while ensuring the visitor would feel scrutinized. A deliberate power play that Arabella recognized immediately. Instead of taking the indicated seat, Arabella moved to a closer chair, angled slightly to the side of the settee, a position that put them nearly on equal footing. I hope you don't mind, she said pleasantly. My aunt suffers from failing hearing, and I've become accustomed to sitting where conversation requires less effort. It was a transparent excuse, but one the Duchess could hardly challenge without appearing petty. A flicker of annoyance crossed her aristocratic features before she composed them into a mask of polite interest. "How considerate of you to attend to Lady Berkeley's needs," she replied. "Family loyalty is an admirable quality." "Indeed," Arabella agreed, meeting the older woman's gaze directly. "Though I believe loyalty should be earned through love and respect, not demanded as a birthright." The Duchess's eyes narrowed slightly at this thinly veiled criticism. "You speak of loyalty, yet I understand your engagement to the French Comte is to be dissolved. Hardly a demonstration of constancy." "My arrangement with Jean-Michel was based on mutual honesty and respect," Arabella countered evenly. "Unlike some relationships I might mention, there was no deception between us." The gauntlet had been thrown. For a moment, silence hung in the elegantly appointed room as the two women regarded each other with clear-eyed assessment. "I see my son has shared his interpretation of past events with you," the Duchess said finally. "Not his interpretation, Your Grace, the truth, as confirmed by your own admission to him." The Duchess sighed, adjusting the folds of her gown with meticulous precision. "You are young, Lady Arabella. You see the world in stark contrasts of right and wrong, truth and deception. With age comes an understanding that sometimes the kindest actions appear cruel in the moment." "Kindness?" Arabella repeated incredulously. "You call it kindness to intercept letters, to engineer false conversations, to deliberately separate two people who loved each other? I call it a mother's duty to protect her son from an unsuitable alliance that would have brought him unhappiness," the Duchess replied with chilling certainty. "You were wrong for Henry then. You remain wrong for him now." The baldness of this declaration might once have wounded Arabella deeply. Now, fortified by the knowledge of Henry's enduring love, she found herself almost pitying the older woman's rigidity. "And what makes me so unsuitable, Your Grace? My birth? My father was an earl, hardly insignificant nobility. My fortune? Reduced certainly, but not eliminated. Or is it simply that I dared to have opinions of my own, to speak honestly rather than simper and flatter?" The Duchess regarded her with cold assessment. "You lack the temperament to be a duchess, the restraint, the understanding of sacrifice and obligation that the position requires. You would make Henry happy for a season, perhaps, but you would ultimately destroy the very qualities that make him the man he is." "What an interesting assessment," Arabella mused, "considering your own approach to the role. Tell me, Your Grace, has your manipulation of your son's life brought him happiness these past 3 years? Has your rigid insistence on propriety over joy fulfilled your obligations to his well-being?" Color rose in the Duchess's cheeks. "You dare to question my devotion to my son?" "I question your understanding of what truly matters to him," Arabella replied steadily. "Henry doesn't need a wife who will bend to every social convention or place family status above personal fulfillment. He needs a partner who will challenge him when necessary, support him always, and love him for himself, not his title." "And you believe yourself to be this paragon?" the Duchess asked, her tone scathing. "I believe I love your son for exactly who he is," Arabella said simply. "Not for his title, not for Ravensford House or the family connections, but for his mind, his heart, and his soul. Can you say the same, Your Grace? Do you love Henry for himself, or for what he represents as your son and the Duke?" The question hung in the air between them, uncomfortably direct and impossible to deflect with social niceties. For the first time, the Duchess seemed genuinely taken aback, as if no one had ever dared to question the nature of her maternal love. "You have become remarkably impertinent during your time abroad," she observed, but there was a new note in her voice, something almost like respect, if not approval. "Not impertinent, Your Grace, merely honest. And perhaps that is what you have truly objected to all along, my refusal to pretend, to play the games of polite deception that society requires." The Duchess studied her for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. "And if I were to tell you that I still oppose this connection, that I will use every means at my disposal to separate you from my son once more?" Arabella met her gaze without flinching. I would say that you are welcome to try, Your Grace, but you will fail. Not because I am stronger or more clever than you, but because Henry himself will not allow it. He has seen behind the curtain of your manipulations now. That knowledge cannot be undone. Something shifted in the Duchess's expression, a subtle softening, or perhaps simply resignation. He threatened to cut all ties with me, she admitted, almost to herself. My own son, whom I have guided and protected all his life, was prepared to sever our connection entirely over you. There was genuine pain in her voice, and despite everything, Arabella felt a flicker of compassion for this proud woman facing the loss of her son's regard. It doesn't have to be that way, she said more gently. Henry loves you, despite everything. He doesn't wish to choose between us. Yet he has made his choice abundantly clear, the Duchess observed bitterly. He has chosen love, Arabella corrected. Not me over you, but happiness over convention, truth over manipulation. Can you truly blame him for that? The Duchess rose abruptly, moving to the window where afternoon sunlight filtered through sheer curtains. For a long moment, she stood with her back to Arabella, her posture rigidly controlled. I have only ever wanted what was best for him, she said finally, her voice softer than before. For him to fulfill the potential of his birth, to honor the legacy of his father and all the dukes before him. And he will, Arabella assured her, rising as well. But on his own terms, Your Grace. Not as a perfect replica of his predecessors, but as the man he is meant to be. Compassionate, just, and guided by his own conscience rather than outdated notions of duty. The Duchess turned to face her, and Arabella was startled to see the glimmer of unshed tears in the older woman's eyes. You speak well, Lady Arabella, perhaps too well for my comfort, but I begin to understand what my son sees in you. It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was more than Arabella had dared to hope for. Then perhaps there is a path forward for all of us, she suggested cautiously. Not as adversaries, but as people who both love Henry in our different ways. Perhaps, the Duchess conceded, though her tone suggested she remained far from convinced. Though I warn you, I will not transform overnight into a doting mother-in-law overflowing with affection. Despite the tension of the moment, Arabella found herself smiling. I would be deeply suspicious if you did, Your Grace. Neither of us is much inclined to pretense. A ghost of a smile touched the Duchess's lips as well, the first genuine expression Arabella had ever seen from her. On that, at least, we are agreed. She straightened her shoulders, composure fully restored. I shall not oppose your reconciliation with my son further, not because I approve, but because I am not blind to the inevitable. It was hardly a warm endorsement, but from the Duchess of Ravensford, this qualified neutrality was tantamount to a blessing. Arabella recognized it as the closest thing to a peace offering she was likely to receive. Thank you, Your Grace, she said sincerely. For Henry's sake, I am glad. The Duchess inclined her head slightly. You may inform my son that he need not lurk in his study any longer. I have said what I wished to say, and remarkably, the world continues to turn. This dry acknowledgment of Henry's protective hovering surprised a genuine laugh from Arabella. I shall tell him immediately. As she turned to leave, the Duchess spoke once more, her voice holding an unexpected note of vulnerability. Lady Arabella. Arabella paused, looking back inquiringly. He was never so alive as when he knew you, the Duchess admitted reluctantly. These past 3 years, a light went out of him that nothing could rekindle, not even a mother's love. The confession clearly cost her dearly, and Arabella recognized it for the olive branch it truly was. I will do everything in my power to keep that light burning, Your Grace. You have my word. With a final curtsy, more respectful than her initial one had been, Arabella left the blue salon. As the door closed behind her, she released a long, shaky breath, only now allowing herself to acknowledge how tense the encounter had made her. She found Henry waiting in the corridor, not even pretending he hadn't been standing guard nearby. His expression was a mixture of concern and barely suppressed curiosity. Well, he asked anxiously, should I prepare for another 3 years of maternal disapproval? Arabella smiled, reaching for his hand. I believe we have negotiated a tentative truce. Not friendship, certainly, but perhaps mutual tolerance. Tolerance? Henry repeated, looking both surprised and impressed. From my mother? Bella, you've performed a miracle. I expected to find one of you triumphant and the other in tears. The day is young, Arabella teased. There's still time for tears, though I can't promise whose they might be. Henry laughed, drawing her hand to his lips. My brave, brilliant Bella. I should have known you would handle my mother with the same grace and courage you bring to everything. Not everything, she admitted. I'm terrified of spiders. Then I shall slay all arachnids that dare approach you, he declared solemnly. It's the least a duke can do for the woman who has conquered the Duchess of Ravensford. As they walked together through the grand corridors of Ravensford House, a house that might one day be Arabella's home, she marveled at how far they had come in just a few days. From bitter estrangement to tentative reconciliation, from heartbreak to hope. There were still challenges ahead, of course. Society would gossip about her broken engagement and renewed connection to the Duke. The Duchess's truce might prove fragile under pressure. And there was Thomas to consider, returning from his diplomatic adventure to find his sister's circumstances dramatically altered. But for now, with Henry's hand warm and secure around hers, Arabella allowed herself to believe that the worst was behind them. That perhaps, after 3 years of separation and misunderstanding, their timing was finally right. What are you thinking? Henry asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. Arabella smiled up at him, her heart full of a cautious joy. I'm thinking that, sometimes, the longest way around proves to be the shortest way home. Henry's answering smile was radiant with understanding and shared hope. Then welcome home, my love, he said simply. Welcome home at last. The next fortnight passed in a whirlwind of carefully orchestrated social maneuvers. Jean-Michel returned to Paris with appropriate public regret, citing diplomatic responsibilities that made an extended absence from France impossible. Society buzzed with speculation, but the amicable nature of the broken engagement, with both parties expressing continued respect and friendship, prevented the scandal many had anticipated. Thomas arrived from Paris 2 days after Jean-Michel's departure, bringing with him detailed accounts of his diplomatic adventures and a newfound appreciation for his sister's resourcefulness. To think you engineered a false engagement to help extract me from Vienna, he marveled as they sat in Aunt Agatha's morning room. Quite dramatic, even for you, Bella. The engagement wasn't entirely about you, Arabella corrected, though she couldn't help smiling at her brother's characteristic self-absorption. But I'm glad it proved useful on multiple fronts. And now you find yourself conveniently unattached, just as the Duke of Ravensford begins to show renewed interest, Thomas observed shrewdly. A most fortunate coincidence. Aunt Agatha snorted delicately. There is nothing coincidental about it, Thomas. Your sister has finally stopped running from her feelings, and the Duke has finally swallowed his pride. The timing is deliberate, I assure you. Thomas grinned, unabashed. Well, I, for one, approve. Ravensford is a decent sort, despite his mother. He shuddered theatrically. That woman gives me chills, like being examined by a particularly judgmental statue. Thomas, Arabella chided, though she privately thought the description rather apt. What? It's true. Though I hear you managed to negotiate some sort of truce with her, which is more than I would have managed. He regarded his sister with genuine admiration. You've changed, Bella. There's a confidence about you now that wasn't there before. 3 years of exile and disappointment will do that, Arabella replied, but without bitterness. France was good for me in its way. I had to discover who I was apart from English society's expectations. And who are you? Thomas asked, surprisingly serious for once. Apart from potentially the future Duchess of Ravensford, I mean. Arabella considered this thoughtfully. I'm a woman who knows her own mind and heart, who values honesty above convention and courage above comfort. She smiled slightly, and who has learned that holding a grudge, however justified, only imprisons oneself. Thomas whistled low. Quite philosophical. France has much to answer for, as does Vienna, Aunt Agatha interjected dryly. I understand you've been offered a new diplomatic post, Thomas? Indeed. Thomas straightened, clearly pleased with this development. The Foreign Office was impressed by how I handled the misunderstanding in Vienna. I'm to be sent to Italy next month. Rome, specifically. Misunderstanding? Arabella repeated incredulously. You were accused of espionage. Thomas waved this away with cheerful dismissal. Political theater? Nothing more. The important thing is that Lord Liverpool himself has taken notice of my potential. A potential we always knew you possessed, Aunt Agatha observed, once you stopped chasing every pretty face at Almack's and applied yourself to something worthwhile. Thomas had the grace to look abashed. Yes, well, a diplomatic crisis does tend to focus one's priorities rather sharply. The conversation turned to Thomas's Italian assignment, but Arabella found her thoughts drifting to Henry. They had seen each other nearly every day since their reconciliation, sometimes at carefully selected social events, sometimes in the supervised privacy of Aunt Agatha's drawing room. Each encounter deepened her conviction that they were finding their way back to each other as stronger, more self-aware individuals than they had been 3 years ago. Yet something was holding Henry back, a reserve that manifested in moments of hesitation, a caution that hadn't been present in their first courtship. Though his love was evident in every look and gesture, he had not formally declared himself again, nor had he pressed for any commitment beyond their current understanding. Arabella suspected she knew the cause. Despite all evidence that their separation had been orchestrated by others, Henry still carried a shadow of doubt, not in his feelings for her, but in his worthiness of her trust. The proud man who had let her go once rather than chase after her still feared, perhaps, that history might repeat itself at the first misunderstanding. It was a fear she was determined to lay to rest, once and for all. That evening, at Lady Hartington's musical soirée, a smaller, more intimate gathering than the Pembroke musical had been, Arabella put her plan into action. She had arranged with Lady Hartington, a romantic soul beneath her society matron exterior, for use of the conservatory during a specific interval in the program. Now she needed only to ensure Henry would meet her there at the appointed time. Her opportunity came when Henry approached her during a break between performances, his face lighting with the smile he reserved solely for her. You look particularly lovely tonight, he said softly, his eyes appreciating the deep blue of her gown, a color she had chosen deliberately, knowing he associated it with their earliest conversations. Thank you, she replied. Though I confess the room is rather warm. I was thinking of stepping into the conservatory for some air during the next performance. Understanding flickered in Henry's eyes. Would you care for an escort? The conservatory can be quite extensive, and I would hate for you to lose your way. How thoughtful, Arabella said, fighting a smile. Perhaps in 15 minutes? After Lady Hartington's niece begins her cello piece? 15 minutes, Henry confirmed, his voice low and intimate. I shall count each second. The anticipation of their planned rendezvous carried Arabella through the next performance, though she scarcely heard a note of the pianist's skilled interpretation of Mozart. When Lady Hartington's niece took her position with her cello, Arabella slipped quietly from the music room, making her way through the mansion's corridors to the magnificent glass conservatory at its rear. Lady Hartington had arranged it perfectly. A single lamp burned low near the entrance, casting a gentle glow that illuminated the path while leaving the depths of the plant-filled space in romantic shadow. The warm, humid air was heavy with the scent of exotic blooms and rich earth, reminiscent of the greenhouse at Lady Wilton's estate, where Arabella and Henry had first spoken honestly to each other all those years ago. Arabella moved deeper into the conservatory, past towering palms and delicate ferns, until she reached a small bench positioned before a tinkling fountain. Here she waited, her heart beating a rapid cadence against her ribs. She did not have to wait long. Henry's footsteps, deliberate and measured, announced his approach before he appeared around a verdant corner. He paused when he saw her, silhouetted against the fountain's gentle spray, and Arabella was struck by the naked emotion on his face. Desire, tenderness, and a vulnerability he allowed no one else to see. "Bella," he said simply, crossing to her in 3 long strides. She rose to meet him, her hands extended. "Thank you for coming." "As if I could stay away," he replied, taking her hands in his. "Though I confess, this clandestine meeting has a rather nostalgic quality to it." "That was my intention," Arabella admitted. "Do you remember the greenhouse at Lady Wilton's estate, where you found me hiding from Lord Pembroke's unwelcome attentions?" Henry's expression softened with remembrance. "How could I forget? You were reading Wordsworth and scowling so fiercely I nearly retreated before you looked up." "But you didn't retreat," Arabella reminded him. "You asked what Wordsworth had done to offend me so gravely." You launched into the most passionate critique of She Walks in Beauty I had ever heard," Henry recalled, smiling. "I was captivated from that moment, though I tried desperately not to show it." "You failed rather spectacularly," Arabella teased. "Your eyes gave you away completely." "My eyes have always been treacherously honest where you're concerned," Henry admitted, "even when the rest of me was bound by pride and propriety." The perfect opening. Arabella took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Henry, there's a reason I wanted to meet you here, in a place that echoes where our story truly began." His expression grew serious, attentive. "I'm listening. These past weeks have been healing," Arabella began carefully. "Discovering the truth about our separation, finding our way back to each other. It's more than I dared hope for when I returned to London." "For me as well," Henry agreed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "But there's something still unresolved between us," she continued. "A shadow that falls across your eyes sometimes when you look at me. A hesitation that wasn't there before." Henry's hand stilled, his expression confirming her observation. "Bella, no, please let me finish," she said gently. "I think I understand the cause. You fear that I might still doubt you, that at the first misunderstanding or challenge, I might run again rather than stand and fight for what we have." The naked vulnerability in his eyes told her she had struck true. "The thought has occurred to me," he admitted quietly. "Not because I doubt your feelings, but because I failed you once. I let pride keep me from pursuing you beyond the first rejection. I accepted returned letters and your father's refusals as the final word. And you think I might not trust you to fight for us now," Arabella concluded softly. "Could you blame me if I wondered?" Henry asked, his voice raw with honesty. 3 years is a long time to rebuild trust. "Which is precisely why I asked you to meet me here tonight," Arabella said, squeezing his hands firmly. "To tell you something important, something you need to hear." She drew a deep breath, holding his gaze steadily with her own. "I trust you, Henry Ashford, completely and without reservation. I believe in your love, your constancy, and your courage, and I vow to you now, in this place that echoes where we first found each other, that I will never again allow pride, fear, or misunderstanding to separate us." The simple, heartfelt declaration seemed to strike Henry with physical force. For a moment he stood perfectly still, his expression one of wonder and dawning joy. "Bella," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. "I'm not finished," she continued, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "There's more you need to know. I love you, Henry. I have loved you since that day in the greenhouse when you defended my right to criticize poetry written by men who clearly had never met an actual woman. I loved you when I thought you had rejected me. I loved you in France when I tried desperately not to love you." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back, determined to finish what she had begun. "And I love you now, more deeply and truly than I did before, because I know exactly who you are. Not the perfect duke society sees, but the man beneath the title. The man who builds schools for tenant children because education matters. The man who remembers exactly which Wordsworth poem I criticized 3 years ago. The man who loved me enough to let me go and loved me enough to welcome me back." Henry's eyes had grown suspiciously bright as well. With exquisite tenderness, he raised one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Arabella Whitmore," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "you humble me with your courage and your faith. I have spent 3 years regretting the words I never said, the actions I never took. Allow me to remedy that now." To Arabella's astonishment, Henry sank to one knee before her, still clasping one of her hands in his. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box that he opened to reveal a ring of breathtaking beauty, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in elegantly worked gold. "I have carried this with me every day since you left London," he confessed. "A reminder of what I lost through pride and a promise to myself that if I ever found you again, I would not waste a moment in indecision." Arabella stared at the ring, then at Henry's upturned face, her heart threatening to burst from the sheer intensity of her emotions. "I love you, Bella," Henry continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Not as a duke loves a suitable bride, but as a man loves the other half of his soul. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not because society expects it, or because titles and fortunes align, but because two people who have found each other against all odds deserve the chance to build a life together?" For a breathless moment, Arabella could only look at him, this proud, honorable man kneeling before her in honest supplication. Then joy bubbled up within her, irrepressible and complete. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Henry, I will marry you. For all those reasons, and 1,000 more." Henry rose in one fluid motion, slipping the ring onto her finger before gathering her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future, tender yet passionate, familiar yet thrilling in its renewed discovery. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and flushed, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me the happiest of men," he murmured. "And I the happiest of women," Arabella replied, her arms still twined around his neck. "Though I must confess, I'm rather glad we waited 3 years for this moment." Henry drew back slightly, his eyebrow raised in question. "Glad? For 3 years of separation? For 3 years of growth," Arabella corrected gently. "The Henry who first caught my attention was a good man, but still bound by convention and expectation. The Henry before me now has discovered his own principles, separate from society's demands." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "And the Arabella who captivated me then was spirited and true, but still uncertain of her place in the world, while the Arabella before you now knows exactly who she is and what she wants," she finished, smiling up at him. "Perhaps we needed that time apart to become the people who could truly appreciate each other." Henry considered this philosophical assessment, his thumb tracing the outline of her jaw. "A lovely sentiment," he agreed. "Though I maintain I would have appreciated you quite thoroughly 3 years ago as well." The deliberate suggestiveness in his tone made Arabella blush, even as she laughed at his teasing. "Henry Ashford! Such impropriety from a duke!" "Only with his future Duchess," he countered, stealing another quick kiss before reluctantly releasing her. "Speaking of propriety, we should probably return to the musicale before our absence becomes the primary performance of the evening." Arabella glanced down at the sapphire, now gleaming on her finger. "Shall I remove this until we've made a formal announcement?" "Absolutely not," Henry declared firmly. "Let them see it. Let them speculate and gossip. I'm finished with hiding my feelings for you, Bella. From this moment forward, the world should know exactly where my heart resides." The passionate declaration warmed Arabella to her core. This was the man she had glimpsed beneath the ducal facade 3 years ago, passionate, decisive, and unapologetic in his devotion. Now, freed from the constraints of others' expectations, he was finally allowing that true self to emerge. "Very well," she agreed, twining her fingers with his. "Let the tongue talk. We have nothing to hide and everything to celebrate." They returned to the musicale just as Lady Hartington's niece completed her cello performance to enthusiastic applause. As they slipped back into the music room, Arabella was acutely aware of curious eyes darting between their clasped hands and flushed faces. Lady Whistledown, positioned near the refreshment table, nearly dropped her teacup when she caught sight of the sapphire ring glinting on Arabella's finger. By morning, all of London would know that Lady Arabella Whitmore, barely 3 weeks after dissolving her engagement to a French comte, had accepted a proposal from the Duke of Ravensford. Society would buzz with speculation, criticism, and romantic sighs in equal measure. But as Henry guided her to a seat beside Eleanor, who spotted the ring immediately and clapped her hands in silent delight, Arabella found she didn't care a whit for society's opinion. She had endured its worst already and emerged stronger. Whatever whispers might follow this sudden engagement paled in comparison to the joy of finally claiming the happiness that had been denied them for so long. "You're glowing," Eleanor whispered, as Henry was momentarily engaged by Lord Liverpool. "Both of you. It's rather disgustingly perfect." Arabella smiled, unable to contain her happiness. "I feel rather disgustingly perfect, to be honest." "Good," Eleanor declared firmly. "After what you've both endured, you deserve every moment of disgusting perfection available." She squeezed Arabella's hand. "Welcome to the family, sister. Officially this time." "Thank you," Arabella replied, genuinely touched by Eleanor's wholehearted acceptance. "Though I believe your mother might have a slightly different reaction to the news." Eleanor's eyes twinkled mischievously. "Oh, Mother, will maintain a dignified public acceptance while privately drafting extensive lists of how you must be improved to be a proper duchess. I suggest nodding politely while doing exactly as you please." "Sound advice for handling the Duchess," Henry commented, rejoining them in time to catch his sister's recommendation. "I've employed the strategy myself for years." The siblings shared a laugh, and Arabella marveled at the ease between them. A warm, genuine affection, unmarred by pretense or performance. This, she realized, was what she was truly gaining. Not just Henry and his title, but a family bound by love rather than merely duty. A sister in Eleanor, perhaps even eventually a wary respect with the Duchess. Connections based on authentic feeling rather than social expectation. As the evening progressed, Arabella caught Henry watching her with the expression of such profound contentment that it nearly brought tears to her eyes. They had traversed a long and winding road to reach this moment, a path marked by pride and pain, misunderstanding and manipulation. Yet somehow, against all odds, they had found their way back to each other. Later, as Henry handed her into her aunt's carriage for the journey home, he raised her gloved hand to his lips, his eyes holding hers with solemn promise. "Until tomorrow, my love," he murmured. "And all the tomorrows after." "Until tomorrow," Arabella echoed, her heart full to bursting with joy and anticipation. As the carriage pulled away, she watched Henry standing tall and straight in the lamplight, a figure from a dream finally made real. The sapphire on her finger caught the light, winking like a star fallen to earth. A tangible reminder that sometimes love truly did conquer all, even the most formidable obstacles of pride and circumstance. The journey home passed in a blur of happy contemplation. London slept peacefully around them, unaware that within its fashionable streets, a love story once thought tragically ended had instead found its way to a new beginning, one all the sweeter for having been so nearly lost. And if Lady Whistledown's society column the following morning declared the engagement of Lady Arabella Whitmore to the Duke of Ravensford the most romantic reconciliation since the mythical reunion of Odysseus and Penelope, well, for once, the gossips had managed to get the essence of the story exactly right. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Society, predictably, erupted in a frenzy of gossip and speculation at the announcement of Arabella and Henry's engagement. The dramatic narrative of their separation and reunion, though few knew the complete truth of it, captured the romantic imagination of London. "I've received 17 callers today," Aunt Agatha declared, collapsing into her favorite chair with uncharacteristic weariness. 17! All of them desperate for details of your star-crossed romance with the Duke. Arabella looked up from the correspondence she was answering. Congratulatory notes had flooded in from all corners of society, requiring meticulous responses. "What did you tell them?" "That true love prevails despite interfering mothers-in-law," Aunt Agatha replied with a wicked smile, though I may have phrased it somewhat more diplomatically. "Aunt Agatha," Arabella exclaimed, though she couldn't help laughing. The Duchess and I have reached a tentative peace. There's no need to antagonize her further. Peace, is it? Aunt Agatha sniffed skeptically. The woman sent over a tome entitled Duties and Responsibilities of a Duchess yesterday. Hardly seems like a white flag to me. This was true. The Duchess, while publicly accepting the engagement with appropriate grace, had been subtly asserting her influence through a steady stream of instructional materials and helpful suggestions regarding everything from Arabella's wardrobe to the wedding arrangements. She's trying in her way, Arabella defended, though privately she found the Duchess's methods rather heavy-handed. Besides, Henry intervenes whenever her guidance becomes too insistent. As well he should, Aunt Agatha declared firmly. The boy has finally found his backbone where his mother is concerned. About time, too. Penelope burst into the room before Arabella could respond, her face flushed with excitement. Bella, have you seen the latest from Lady Whistledown? She's comparing your romance to a Greek epic. Listen to this. She brandished the society page dramatically and began to read, Not since Odysseus returned to claim his faithful Penelope has London witnessed such a triumphant reunion of hearts destined for one another. That Lady Arabella should return from her French exile only to discover that the Duke's affections remained steadfast. Through years of separation is the sort of narrative that makes even the most cynical observer believe in the power of enduring love. Arabella buried her face in her hands, equal parts mortified and amused. Good heavens, we'll never hear the end of this. It's wonderful, Penelope insisted. The entire ton is enchanted by your story. Lady Jersey herself told Mama that your wedding will be the event of the season. Which reminds me, Aunt Agatha interjected, suddenly businesslike. The Duchess has sent over her suggestions for the wedding breakfast menu. 47 separate items, including 3 types of fish and a peacock arranged in full plumage. A peacock? Arabella repeated incredulously. Absolutely not. I refuse to have a wedding breakfast that resembles a Roman emperor's feast. I thought you might say that, Aunt Agatha replied with evident satisfaction. I've already sent her a polite note explaining that we've engaged Gunter's for a more modest but elegant affair. Penelope gasped. You refuse the Duchess's suggestions? Mama, you're terribly brave. I'm terribly practical, Aunt Agatha corrected. The woman may be a duchess, but this is still my house, and Arabella is still my niece. Besides, she added with a sly smile, I've already confirmed with Henry that he prefers Gunter's almond cakes to peacock any day. Arabella laughed outright at this strategic maneuvering. You consulted Henry before rejecting his mother's suggestions? Aunt Agatha, you're becoming quite the diplomat. One must adapt one's tactics to the battlefield, Aunt Agatha replied serenely. Speaking of which, the Duchess has requested your presence at Ravensford House tomorrow afternoon. Something about reviewing the family jewels you'll be entitled to wear after the ceremony. This was an unexpected development. Access to the Ravensford jewels was a significant gesture from the Duchess, a tacit acknowledgement of Arabella's imminent position as the new Duchess of Ravensford. I suppose that's progress, Arabella mused, though I wouldn't be surprised if she shows me the most modest pieces in the collection. Actually, came a deep voice from the doorway, she intends to show you my grandmother's sapphires. They match your engagement ring. All 3 women turned in surprise to find Henry standing there, having been admitted quietly by the butler. His tall figure filled the door frame, and the warmth in his eyes as he gazed at Arabella made her heart skip traitorously. Henry, she exclaimed, rising quickly, we didn't expect you until dinner. I finished my business at the House of Lords early and couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather be, he replied simply, crossing the room to take her hands and press a brief kiss to her cheek. Though I see I've interrupted a family conclave. Nothing so formal, Aunt Agatha assured him, though her eyes twinkled with amusement at his evident eagerness to see Arabella. Merely the usual wedding preparations and gossip. Ah, yes. Lady Whistledown has been particularly industrious lately, Henry observed dryly. I was compared to Perseus rescuing Andromeda in the Gentlemen's Club this morning. Lord Liverpool found it highly amusing. Perseus? Arabella repeated skeptically. I hardly think I was chained to a rock awaiting a sea monster. No, But you were tragically exiled by circumstances beyond your control, Penelope pointed out with romantic enthusiasm. And the Duke has heroically reclaimed you from the clutches of foreign diplomacy. Henry's lips twitched with suppressed laughter. I believe that's the first time my courtship has been described as a rescue from the clutches of foreign diplomacy. Your cousin has quite a way with words, Bella. Penelope has always had a flair for the dramatic, Arabella agreed, smiling affectionately at her cousin. Though in this case, the Tun seems determined to match her imagination step for step. Let them talk, Henry said, his expression growing serious as he gazed down at her. Their gossip cannot touch what exists between us. The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet certainty, filled Arabella with warmth. This was the Henry she had fallen in love with, the man behind the ducal facade who could cut through society's noise to the heart of what truly mattered. Aunt Agatha cleared her throat meaningfully. Penelope, I believe we have correspondence to attend to in the morning room. But we just finished the... Penelope began, before catching her mother's pointed look. Oh, yes, those important letters, in the morning room, which we must write immediately. With a complete lack of subtlety that made Arabella struggle not to laugh, aunt and cousin withdrew, leaving her alone with Henry. Your aunt is becoming increasingly creative with her chaperoning duties, Henry observed as the door closed behind them. Yesterday she developed a sudden interest in her gardening when we were walking in the park. She believes in the restorative power of private conversation, Arabella replied, her eyes dancing with mischief. Though I suspect her definition of conversation might be somewhat flexible. Henry's gaze grew heated as he drew her closer. I confess at this moment, conversation is not foremost in my mind. Your Grace, Arabella murmured in mock scandal. How improper. Entirely, he agreed, before capturing her lips in a kiss that expressed exactly how little he cared for propriety when they were alone together. When they finally broke apart, both somewhat breathless, Arabella rested her hands against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. 3 more weeks, she said softly. It seems an eternity. After 3 years apart, 3 weeks is but a moment, Henry replied, though the longing in his eyes belied his philosophical tone. Though I confess, each day stretches longer than the last. Arabella smiled up at him, touched by this admission. The mighty Duke of Ravensford impatient? What would society say? Society would be shocked to discover how thoroughly impatient I am to make you my wife, Henry murmured, his voice dropping to an intimate register that sent shivers down Arabella's spine. In every sense of the word. Heat bloomed in her cheeks at his meaning, but she held his gaze steadily. Then we are equally impatient, it seems. A groan escaped him as he pressed his forehead to hers. You will be the death of my self-control, Bella. I certainly hope so, she replied with newfound boldness, though perhaps not until after our vows. Henry laughed, the sound rich with both amusement and desire. Minx, you've grown considerably more direct during your time in France. The French have a refreshing attitude towards certain matters, Arabella agreed, enjoying his reaction to her teasing. One of the many benefits of foreign travel. Remind me to thank Jean-Michel for his country's educational influence, Henry murmured, stealing another brief kiss before reluctantly releasing her. Though for now, I should probably maintain a more appropriate distance before your aunt returns and finds me compromising your virtue in her drawing room. Arabella smoothed her skirts, composing herself with an effort. A wise decision. Besides, I believe you came bearing news about tomorrow's meeting with your mother? Henry nodded, his expression growing more serious. Yes, she specifically asked to show you the sapphire parure that belonged to my grandmother, a collection of considerable significance in our family history. Is that unusual? Arabella asked, uncertain of the implications. Very, Henry confirmed. My mother has always been protective of the family jewels. That she wishes to introduce you to the collection, particularly my grandmother's favorite pieces, suggests she's making a genuine effort to accept your place in the family. Arabella absorbed this information thoughtfully. The Duchess continues to surprise me. Just when I think she remains implacably opposed to our match, She makes some gesture that suggests otherwise. My mother is nothing if not complex, Henry acknowledged. She operates according to her own internal logic, which often appears contradictory to others. But I believe she's coming to recognize what I've known all along, that you will make an exceptional duchess. I'm not sure I agree with that assessment, Arabella admitted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. I've never aspired to be a duchess, with all the responsibilities and expectations the title entails. I only aspire to be your wife. Henry's expression softened with tenderness. And that, my love, is precisely why you will excel in both roles. You see the man, not the title, yet you have the intelligence, compassion, and strength of character to shoulder the duties that come with being my duchess. His faith in her was both touching and daunting. Arabella had given little thought to the practical implications of becoming Duchess of Ravensford, focusing instead on the personal joy of reuniting with Henry. Now, with the wedding approaching, the reality of her future position was beginning to crystallize. I hope I won't disappoint you, she said softly. Or your family legacy. Impossible, Henry declared firmly, taking her hands in his once more. The legacy of Ravensford has endured for centuries, not through rigid adherence to tradition, but through adaptation and renewal with each generation. You bring fresh perspectives, new ideas, a different kind of strength. That's not a threat to our legacy. It's the very thing that will ensure its continuation. The conviction in his voice steadied her, reminding Arabella why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. Henry saw her, truly saw her. Not as society did, or as his mother feared, but as she was, with all her potential and possibility. When you put it that way, she replied with a small smile. How could I possibly fail? You couldn't, Henry assured her. Though I expect there will be moments when my mother makes you question that certainty. Tomorrow may well be one of them. I shall fortify myself accordingly, Arabella promised. Perhaps a generous breakfast and a review of French diplomatic phrases for expressing polite disagreement. Henry laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she found so endearing. A sound strategy. Though I suspect you'll need less fortification than you imagine. Despite her formidable reputation, my mother is not impervious to sincerity and intelligence, both of which you possess in abundance. Before Arabella could respond, the drawing-room door opened to admit Aunt Agatha, who returned with a transparent pretense of surprise at finding them still in conversation. Still here, Your Grace? How lovely. Will you be joining us for dinner after all? If the invitation stands, Henry replied with a bow. I find myself reluctant to part from my fiancé's company any sooner than necessary. How convenient, since Thomas has invited Lord Liverpool as well, Aunt Agatha said with evident satisfaction. A diplomatic dinner party seems most appropriate, given our family's recent adventures. The evening that followed was indeed diplomatic in more ways than one. Lord Liverpool, genuinely fond of Thomas, despite the young man's recent misadventures in Vienna, proved an engaging dinner companion. The conversation flowed easily from international politics to local society gossip, with Henry demonstrating his characteristic blend of authority and understated wit. Watching him interact with her family, Arabella felt a profound contentment settle over her. This was what she had missed during their years apart. Not just the private moments of connection, but the seamless integration of their lives and loved ones. Henry belonged here, at this table, in this house, in her world, just as surely as she would soon belong in his. Later, as the evening drew to a close and Henry prepared to take his leave, he drew Arabella aside in the entrance hall for a moment of privacy. Tomorrow at 3, he reminded her. Shall I send the carriage for you? Thank you, but I'll have Aunt's coachman drive me, Arabella replied. I think it best if I face your mother on neutral ground, so to speak. Henry nodded, understanding her reasoning. Very wise. Though remember, you enter Ravensford House not as a supplicant, but as its future mistress. My mother knows this, even if she occasionally pretends otherwise. Future mistress, Arabella repeated softly, the concept still somewhat surreal. It hardly seems possible sometimes, that after everything, we found our way here. Not possible, but inevitable, Henry corrected gently. as if all roads, however winding, were always leading us back to each other. The poetic sentiment, so unlike Henry's usual practical manner, touched Arabella deeply. Who knew the Duke of Ravensford harbored such romantic notions? "Only for you, Bella," he murmured, raising her hand to his lips for a lingering kiss. "Only ever for you." As she watched his carriage depart into the London night, Arabella found herself thinking of the journey ahead. Not just the wedding in 3 weeks' time, but the lifetime that would follow. There would be challenges, certainly. The Duchess would not transform overnight into an adoring mother-in-law. Society would scrutinize her every move as the new Duchess of Ravensford. The responsibilities of Henry's position would demand much from both of them. Yet standing on the threshold of this new chapter, Arabella felt not apprehension, but anticipation. They had fought too hard, waited too long, overcome too much to shrink from whatever tests might lie ahead. Tomorrow, she would meet the Duchess and view the Ravensford jewels, another step toward claiming her place in Henry's world. It might be awkward, perhaps even difficult, but Arabella faced the prospect with quiet confidence. After all, the greatest hurdle had already been crossed. Pride had been swallowed, truth revealed, love reclaimed. The rest, however complicated, was merely detail. With this comforting thought, Arabella returned to the warmth of her aunt's house, already composing in her mind the letter she would write to Jean-Michel tomorrow, sharing news of these latest developments. Her French friend would appreciate the irony that after orchestrating a false engagement to help her return to London with dignity intact, she was now navigating the very real complexities of becoming a duchess. Life, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all, and a far better imagination than even the most romantic of society gossips. The morning of Arabella and Henry's wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect June day that seemed crafted specifically for the occasion. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Berkeley House as Arabella sat before her dressing table, watching Mary arrange the last of the orange blossoms in her carefully styled hair. "There, my lady," Mary said with satisfaction, stepping back to admire her work. "Perfect." Arabella studied her reflection, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who looked back at her. The wedding gown, a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate Brussels lace, complemented her slender figure perfectly. Around her neck lay the Ravensford sapphires, a stunning necklace of deep blue stones surrounded by diamonds that had been presented to her by the Duchess herself during their surprisingly cordial meeting at Ravensford House. That encounter had marked a turning point in their relationship. Surrounded by generations of ducal treasures, the Duchess had been more candid than Arabella had ever seen her. "These jewels have adorned the necks of Ravensford duchesses for over 200 years, she had explained, opening the velvet case that held the sapphire parure. Each woman who wore them brought her own strength to the title. Arabella had touched the magnificent necklace hesitantly. "They're beautiful." "Yes," the Duchess agreed. "But more importantly, they're symbolic. When I place these around your neck on your wedding day, I am acknowledging you as the next Duchess of Ravensford, regardless of my reservations about how you came to that position." It was as close to an olive branch as the proud woman was likely to offer, and Arabella had recognized it as such. "I understand your concerns, Your Grace," she had replied carefully. "I'm not the Duchess you would have chosen for your son." "No," the Duchess had admitted bluntly, "you are not. But you are the Duchess he has chosen for himself, with a determination I have rarely witnessed in him. That counts for something. May I ask what changed your mind? About accepting our marriage?" The Duchess had been silent for a long moment, her fingers trailing over the sapphires with a distant expression. "I observed my son during your absence," she said finally. "Watched him fulfill every duty, manage every responsibility with perfect competence, and without a spark of joy in his eyes. When you returned to London, that spark ignited again." She had met Arabella's gaze directly. "I may not approve of all your qualities, Lady Arabella, but I cannot deny that you bring my son happiness. In the end, that outweighs my other concerns." It wasn't quite a blessing, but it was acceptance, genuine, if grudging. And on this wedding morning, as promised, the Duchess had sent the sapphires to Berkeley House with a note that simply read, "Wear these today as a symbol of your place in our family. May you bring as much honor to the title as those who came before you." "Bella?" Aunt Agatha's voice pulled Arabella from her reverie. "Are you ready, my dear? The carriages will be here shortly." Arabella turned to find her aunt standing in the doorway, resplendent in lavender silk and visibly fighting tears. "Almost ready, Aunt. Just gathering my thoughts." Aunt Agatha crossed to her, adjusting a strand of hair with maternal tenderness. "Having second thoughts?" "Not a single one," Arabella assured her with absolute certainty. "I was just reflecting on how much has changed since I returned to London. I never imagined this day would be possible." "I did," Aunt Agatha declared firmly. "I knew from the moment you first spoke of the Duke 3 years ago that your story wasn't finished. Some connections are simply too powerful to be severed, even by the most determined interference." "Even by the Duchess of Ravensford?" Arabella asked with a small smile. "Especially by Augusta Ravensford," Aunt Agatha confirmed with a sniff. "That woman has always overestimated her power to control outcomes, though I must admit, her gesture with the sapphires is more gracious than I expected." Arabella touched the magnificent necklace. "I believe she's trying in her way. She loves Henry, even if her methods of showing it have been problematic. Very diplomatic, my dear. You're sounding like a duchess already." Aunt Agatha's expression softened. "Your parents would be so proud of you today. Not because you're marrying a duke, but because you've remained true to yourself through all the challenges you've faced." The mention of her parents brought a lump to Arabella's throat. Her father had passed away during her 2nd year in France, never knowing the truth about the Duchess's manipulation or having the chance to see his daughter find happiness. "I wish they could be here," she said softly. "They are, in their way," Aunt Agatha assured her, squeezing her hand. "And you have Thomas to give you away, and me to fuss inappropriately, and even the Dowager Duchess to intimidate the guests. Quite the family gathering, when you think about it." Arabella laughed, despite the moisture gathering in her eyes. "Quite unconventional." "Like the bride herself," Aunt Agatha said approvingly. "Now, shall we proceed? I believe there's a certain duke waiting rather impatiently at St. George's." St. George's, Hanover Square, was indeed filled to capacity when Arabella's carriage arrived. The cream of London society had turned out for what Lady Whistledown had declared the romantic culmination of the season's most captivating reunion. Heads turned as Thomas escorted his sister down the aisle, whispers of admiration following in their wake. But Arabella was aware of none of it. From the moment she entered the church, her eyes found Henry standing tall and commanding at the altar, and the rest of the world simply fell away. He was magnificent in formal attire, the Ravensford insignia gleaming on his breast, his dark hair contrasting with the pristine white of his cravat. Yet it was his expression that captured Arabella's heart anew, the look of awestruck devotion as he watched her approach, as if he could scarcely believe this moment had arrived. When Thomas placed her hand in Henry's, Arabella felt a sense of rightness so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. This was where she belonged, where she had always belonged, despite all the forces that had conspired to keep them apart. "You are breathtaking," Henry whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "So are you," she replied simply, unable to express the fullness of her heart in mere words. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of solemn vows and tender promises. When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensford, Henry's kiss was both reverent and possessive, a perfect embodiment of the man himself. The wedding breakfast at Berkeley House was everything Arabella had hoped for. Elegant without ostentation, joyful without excess. Even the Duchess behaved with remarkable graciousness, accepting congratulations with dignified pleasure and refraining from any subtle critiques of the arrangements. Eleanor, radiant in pale blue silk, had thrown her arms around Arabella immediately after the ceremony. "Sister at last," she had exclaimed. "Now you must protect me from Mother's matchmaking efforts. She's already identified 3 suitable prospects for my next season." "Consider it my first official act as Duchess," Arabella had promised, genuinely delighted by her new sister's affection. Now, as the celebration continued around them, Henry found a moment to draw his bride aside into the relative privacy of Aunt Agatha's small library. "Happy, Duchess?" he asked softly, his hand warm and secure around hers. The title, spoken in his voice, sent a thrill through Arabella, not because she had aspired to be a duchess, but because it represented her permanent place at Henry's side. "Blissfully," she assured him, "though I confess I'm rather looking forward to the conclusion of these festivities." Henry's eyes darkened with understanding and anticipation. "As am I. Perhaps we might make our escape slightly earlier than planned." "Scandalous, Your Grace," Arabella teased. "What would society say?" "Society has said quite enough about us already," Henry replied with a rueful smile. "I think we've earned the right to disappear without lengthy farewells, don't you?" Arabella couldn't argue with this logic, particularly when her own desire to be alone with her husband was growing more insistent by the moment. "Very well. Give me 15 minutes to speak with Aunt Agatha, and then we shall make our strategic retreat." Henry raised her hand to his lips, his kiss lingering. 15 minutes, not a second more, or I may be forced to create a diversion. Perhaps challenging Lord Liverpool to a duel would suffice? "Behave yourself, Duke," Arabella admonished, though her eyes sparkled with mirth. "A scandal on our wedding day would be excessive, even for us." "As you wish, Duchess," Henry conceded with mock gravity, "though I make no promises for tomorrow." With a final squeeze of her hand, he released her to make her rounds of farewell. Aunt Agatha, surprisingly, required no explanation for their early departure. "For heaven's sake, child, the man has waited 3 years to have you to himself," she declared when Arabella approached her with carefully crafted excuses. "I'm only surprised he hasn't kidnapped you already. Go with my blessing and send the carriage back for your trunks later." Thomas was equally understanding, though his farewell was tinged with genuine emotion. "You deserve this happiness, Bella," he said, embracing her tightly. "After everything, you deserve it most of all." Even the Duchess merely inclined her head with dignified acceptance when Henry informed her they would be departing for Ravensford House. "A wise decision," she commented. "The new Duchess should familiarize herself with her household without delay." And so, with far less fuss than either had anticipated, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensford slipped away from their wedding celebration into the waiting carriage. As the vehicle pulled away from Berkeley House, Henry drew Arabella into his arms with a sigh of contentment. "Finally," he murmured against her hair. "Just you and me, as it always should have been." Arabella leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. "It seems almost unreal," she admitted. "After so long, to be your wife at last." "My wife?" Henry repeated, the words resonating with pride and wonder. "My Duchess, my Bella." The journey to Ravensford House passed in a sweet haze of whispered endearments and stolen kisses. When they arrived, the staff had been prepared for their early return, forming a discreet receiving line to welcome their new mistress. Thompson, ever the perfect valet, bowed deeply to Arabella. "Welcome home, Your Grace," he said, and in his voice she heard genuine pleasure and approval. "Thank you, Thompson," she replied warmly. "It's good to be home." Home. The word felt right on her lips, though this vast mansion had once seemed the most intimidating of fortresses. Now, with Henry's hand steady at the small of her back, she saw Ravensford House not as a symbol of aristocratic power, but as the place where they would build their life together. Later, much later, as they lay entwined in the massive ducal bed, Arabella traced lazy patterns on Henry's bare chest. "What are you thinking, husband?" she asked, still delighting in the word. Henry captured her wandering hand, bringing it to his lips. "I'm thinking that I have never been so completely, utterly content," he admitted, "and that I would endure another 3 years of separation if it meant arriving at this exact moment with you." "Let's not test that theory," Arabella suggested, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "I much prefer having you here, exactly where you belong." "Where we both belong," Henry corrected gently. "Together, finally." As night settled over London, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensford drifted into peaceful slumber, wrapped in each other's arms. Outside their window, the stars seemed to shine with particular brilliance, as if celebrating this love that had overcome so many obstacles to find its way home. In the days and years that followed, society would often remark on the unusual devotion between the Duke and his unconventional Duchess, how he consulted her on matters of politics and estate management, how she established schools for young women and championed causes that raised eyebrows in conservative circles, how they moved through the world as partners rather than as traditional husband and wife. The Duchess of Ravensford eventually developed a grudging respect for her daughter-in-law, particularly after Arabella gave birth to the next Ravensford heir, a strong-willed boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's quick wit. And when a daughter followed, with an intellect that matched her beauty, even the Duchess had to admit that perhaps, just perhaps, she had been mistaken in her initial assessment of Arabella's suitability. As for Henry and Arabella themselves, they never forgot the lessons of their separation. That pride could be the enemy of happiness, that honesty must triumph over convention, and that true love, once found, was worth fighting for with every weapon at one's disposal. "We were fortunate," Henry often remarked in quiet moments of reflection, "to have found each other not once, but twice in this lifetime." "Not fortune," Arabella would correct gently. "Determination, and perhaps a touch of destiny." And in the end, as Lady Whistledown noted on their 10th wedding anniversary, theirs was a love story that continued to captivate London society, not because of its dramatic beginnings, but because of the lasting devotion it had produced. "For what greater romance exists," she wrote, "than that which flourishes not just in the heat of passion and the thrill of pursuit, but in the daily choice to love, to honor, and to cherish through all the seasons of life. The Duke lost her to pride, then won her with humility, but it is with unwavering devotion that he keeps her, as she keeps him, in a union that has become the standard to which all marriages of the ton might aspire." For once, the gossips had gotten it exactly right. Dear viewers, thank you for joining me on this journey through the tumultuous romance of Lady Arabella and the Duke of Ravensford. Their story reminds us that sometimes the path to true love isn't straight, but winding, filled with challenges that ultimately strengthen the bond between two hearts destined for one another. If you enjoyed this tale of pride overcome, second chances seized, and love triumphant, please subscribe to my channel for more historical romances that will transport you to worlds of passion, intrigue, and timeless emotion. Don't forget to like this video and share it with fellow romance enthusiasts who appreciate stories where love conquers all obstacles. Until our next literary adventure together, remember that true love is worth fighting for, no matter how many years or misunderstandings may stand in its way.